Welcome to another video on stories of our history. To uncover the deep origins of the Persian Empire, we must first venture into the chilling shadow of a forgotten superpower, a confederation of tribes so fierce and resilient that they dared to challenge the absolute masters of the ancient world, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, at the very zenith of its military terror. These were the Medes, an indo-European people who, around 1000 BC, migrated from the vast Eurasian steppes southward across the formidable barrier of the Caucasus Mountains, eventually settling and consolidating their power across the high, fertile valleys and rugged peaks of the northwestern Iranian plateau. Their homeland, known as Media, corresponded roughly to the modern-day provinces of Hamadan, Kurdistan, and Kermanshah in Iran, a strategically crucial region dominated by the towering Zagros mountain range, which served as both a natural fortress against Mesopotamian invasion and a crossroads for the lucrative trade routes that carried lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and tin from the east into the heartland of Assyria and Babylonia. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, provides one of the earliest and most detailed, albeit often mythologized, accounts of their early history, identifying 6 distinct Median tribes: the Buzi, Paradicini, Strucates, Arizanti, Budii, and the Magi, the latter of whom were a priestly caste that would later become famous as the guardians of Zoroastrian ritual and wisdom across the entire Iranian world. These tribes were initially a loose collection of village-dwelling pastoralists and horse breeders, their society organized around fortified citadels ruled by local chieftains, with no central king, a fractious political landscape that made them vulnerable to the predatory tribute demands and punitive raids of the Assyrian war machine, which, from the 9th century BC onward, had been methodically extending its brutal hegemony into the Iranian plateau. The earliest concrete historical mentions of the Medes are not found in Persian legend but in the cold, administrative annals and boastful royal inscriptions of the Assyrian kings themselves, who recorded their encounters with these distant and troublesome peoples on clay tablets and monumental stone reliefs. In 836 BC, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III, during one of his aggressive campaigns to secure tribute and control the vital trade routes of the east, marched into the territory of the Medes, which he referred to as the lands of the Amadai, or Madai. His inscriptions describe a land of numerous, independent city-states, ruled by dozens of petty kings, a fragmented political mosaic that was easy to raid but difficult to permanently subjugate. The Assyrians were particularly interested in the superior Median horses, renowned for their size, strength, and endurance, which were essential for the Assyrian chariotry and cavalry. Shalmaneser's campaigns were characterized by the typical Assyrian methods of terror: the burning of settlements, the destruction of orchards, the massacre of resistors, and the extraction of heavy tribute in the form of horses, cattle, metals, and slaves. The famous black obelisk of Shalmaneser III, now in the British Museum, visually depicts the flow of tribute from various subject peoples, and it is likely that some of the figures leading horses and bearing exotic goods represent Median chieftains delivering their forced payments to the Assyrian monarch. This initial period of contact established a pattern that would persist for over 2 centuries. The Assyrians viewed Media as a valuable but unruly resource base, a source of horses and manpower, to be periodically chastised through devastating military incursions, while the Medes themselves were forced to endure the humiliating burden of vassalage, a pressure that slowly but inexorably forged a nascent sense of shared identity and the imperative for political unification. The Assyrian grip on Media intensified dramatically under the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, 744 to 727 BC, the great reformer of the Neo-Assyrian Empire who transformed it into a ruthlessly efficient and centralized military state. Tiglath-Pileser III abandoned the earlier policy of occasional raids in favor of direct annexation and the creation of newly organized provinces. He campaigned deep into Median territory, reaching as far as Mount Bikni, the mountain of lapis lazuli, which is identified with the formidable Mount Damavand in the Alborz range, a symbolically potent location that marked the farthest reach of Assyrian power to the east. The Assyrian king recorded the deportation of tens of thousands of Medes, a standard tactic designed to break local resistance and provide a labor force for the Assyrian heartland. He established a string of fortified Assyrian garrisons and administrative centers across the newly conquered territories, including the fortresses at Har and Kasisim, which were renamed Kar-Sharakan and Kar-Nergal, respectively, to signify their incorporation into the imperial system. These garrisons were manned by Assyrian soldiers and officials who were tasked with collecting taxes, enforcing Assyrian law, and monitoring the local population. The Assyrian presence had a paradoxical effect. While it was brutally oppressive, it also exposed the Median chieftains to the most sophisticated military organization, siege warfare techniques, and administrative apparatus of the age. The Medes, who had previously fought as tribal levies with little coordination, were now confronted with a professional standing army, and the necessity of survival forced them to learn, adapt, and eventually imitate the very systems that were being used to subjugate them. The seeds of the future Median state were sown in the crucible of Assyrian imperialism, as the need to coordinate resistance against the garrisons and tax collectors provided a powerful incentive for the previously fractious tribes to unite under a single, capable military leader. The reign of Sargon II, 722 to 705 BC, and his son Sennacherib, 705 to 681 BC, saw the continuation of aggressive Assyrian expansion into Media, punctuated by episodes of fierce Median resistance. Sargon II, a formidable warrior king, conducted his eighth major campaign in 716 BC specifically to pacify the eastern frontiers and to solidify Assyrian control over the communication lines to the west. His detailed letters and inscriptions, discovered in the royal archives at Nineveh and Khorsabad, mention numerous Median chieftains by name, describing them as living in remote mountain fortresses and constantly scheming to throw off the Assyrian yoke. Sargon recorded the deportation of additional thousands of Medes to distant parts of the empire, such as Syria and the newly constructed capital of Dur-Sharakan, and the resettlement of conquered peoples from other regions into the depopulated Median districts, a deliberate policy of ethnic churning meant to obliterate local identities. It was during this period of intense Assyrian pressure that, according to Herodotus, a man named Deioces emerged as the first unifier of the Medes. Herodotus tells a story that Deioces, the son of Phraortes, was a wise and just judge in his village who gained such a reputation for fairness that the Medes from across the region came to him to settle their disputes. Eventually, when the lawlessness and chaos of the Assyrian occupation became unbearable, the Medes elected Deioces as their king, tasking him with forging a unified state. Deioces demanded the construction of a magnificent capital city, Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan, with 7 concentric walls, the innermost of which was plated with gold and silver, a symbol of the new and centralized royal authority. While the archaeological evidence for Deioces himself is sparse, and the concentric walls are likely a Greek exaggeration, the site of Godin Tepe in the Kangavar Valley shows clear evidence of a transition from a small, independent Median fortified manor to a larger, more centralized administrative center during the late 8th century BC, reflecting the very political consolidation that the legend describes. This process of unification, driven by the crucible of Assyrian pressure, transformed the Medes from a collection of tribute-paying tribes into a nascent kingdom capable of coordinated military action. The Assyrian records from the reign of Esarhaddon, 681 to 669 BC, reveal a shift in the geopolitical landscape. The Assyrian intelligence reports, written on tiny clay tablets by royal agents, make increasingly anxious references to a coalition of Median chieftains who were swearing oaths of mutual loyalty and refusing to pay the customary tribute. The names of 3 powerful Median leaders, Upis of Partaka, Zanasana of Partuka, and Ramatia of Urukhazabarna, appear in these documents as signatories to a treaty of alliance that posed a direct threat to Assyrian dominance. Esarhaddon, recognizing the growing danger, attempted to neutralize this threat through diplomacy, demanding that these chieftains swear loyalty oaths directly to him and sending Assyrian officials to oversee the administration of the eastern territories. However, the very act of forming these oaths and being recognized as a collective entity by the Assyrian bureaucracy marked a pivotal milestone in the development of Median political identity. The Medes were no longer merely disparate tribes. They were becoming a recognized political force, a shadow, that was slowly growing in the mountains, learning the arts of war and statecraft from their oppressors, and patiently waiting for the moment when the mighty Assyrian Colossus would show a fatal crack in its armor. That moment would arrive in the tumultuous years following the death of Esarhaddon's powerful son, Ashurbanipal, when the internal convulsions and overextension of the Assyrian Empire provided the Medes with the opportunity to erupt from their highland strongholds and take a devastating, world-altering revenge. The geography of Media itself was the single most important factor in shaping the character, economy, and ultimate military destiny of its people, a dramatic landscape of stark contrasts between lush, hidden valleys and jagged, snow-capped peaks that created a natural fortress unlike any other in the Near East. The core of Media was defined by the massive, parallel ridges of the central Zagros mountain range, which run from northwest to southeast, forming a formidable barrier over 1,500 kilometers long, with peaks that reach altitudes exceeding 4,000 meters, such as the towering Mount Alvin near the future capital of Ecbatana. These mountains were not merely an obstacle but a complex, three-dimensional world of deep river gorges carved by the tributaries of the Karka and Des rivers, upland plateaus perfect for grazing, and narrow, easily defended passes that could be held by a handful of determined warriors against an entire army. The Assyrian reliefs, which depict their campaigns into the region, visually emphasize the harshness of the terrain, showing soldiers hacking their way through forested slopes, crossing raging torrents, and assaulting tiny, inaccessible fortresses perched precariously on rocky pinnacles. This geography made a decisive Assyrian conquest of all Media practically impossible. The Assyrian army, with its massive siege engines and heavy infantry, was designed for the flat plains of Mesopotamia and could only operate effectively in the highlands during the brief summer campaigning season, and even then, it was forced to advance along predictable, easily ambushed routes, making it acutely vulnerable to the hit-and-run tactics perfected by the Median mountaineers. The Medes, in contrast, were born to this terrain, knowing every hidden path, every defensible cave, and every pass that was blocked by snow and winter, making their homeland an impregnable base of resistance. The climatic and ecological diversity of Media contributed to a unique mixed economy that supported a large and hardy population, combining highland pastoralism with the sophisticated cultivation of the fertile intermountain valleys. The summers in the valleys, such as the wide plain around Hamadan, were warm and dry, ideal for cultivating barley, wheat, and grapes, while the higher slopes provided excellent summer pastures for the vast herds of horses, sheep, and goats that were the primary measure of wealth for the Median tribal elite. The famous Median horses, the Nicaean breed, were renowned throughout the ancient world for their size, speed, and stamina, and they were a principal commodity for trade and a crucial military asset. The Greek historian Strabo would later write in vivid detail about these horses, describing them as the finest in the world, used by the Persian kings and revered for their beauty and power. The horse was not merely an animal to the Medes, it was central to their identity, their mobility, and their emerging military doctrine, which would eventually revolve around the devastating shock tactics of heavily armored cavalry, a direct precursor to the famous Persian cataphracts. The wealth generated from horse breeding and agriculture allowed the Median tribal chieftains to accumulate the resources necessary to support a warrior elite, to trade for iron and bronze weapons, and to construct the massive stone fortresses that began to dot the landscape, the physical manifestation of their growing political power. The economic surplus of Media was the engine that drove the process of state formation, transforming scattered pastoralists into a cohesive political entity capable of supporting a standing army and a royal court. The strategic position of Media at the great crossroads of the ancient world was both a blessing and a curse, bringing immense wealth from trade but also making it a prime target for imperial predation. The major east-west route, later to be known as the Khorasan Road or the Great Khorasan Highway, passed directly through the heart of Media, connecting the Mesopotamian lowlands around Baghdad and Kermanshah with the Iranian plateau and, ultimately, with the distant civilizations of Central Asia, Bactria, and the Indus Valley. Along this route flowed the most precious commodities of antiquity: lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan, the brilliant blue stone prized for jewelry and royal adornment, tin from the far-off mines of Central Asia, an essential component for the production of bronze, and textiles, spices, and exotic animals. The Assyrian kings, in their inscriptions, consistently justified their costly eastern campaigns by citing the need to secure this trade route and to tap into the flow of wealth directly at its source. The Median chieftains who controlled the strategic passes and the fertile valleys astride this highway could levy tolls on passing caravans and amass considerable riches, but they were also under constant pressure from the Assyrians, who sought to monopolize the eastern trade and bypass the Median intermediaries. The diplomatic correspondence of the Assyrian kings, particularly the letters from the crown prince Sennacherib to his father Sargon II, reveals an obsessive concern with the loyalty of the Median chieftains who controlled the gateways to the east, and an intricate web of spies, informers, and diplomatic gifts was employed to manage these strategic relationships. The Medes, therefore, were not isolated barbarians but active participants in a complex international economic system, and their growing political consciousness was shaped by their role as the gatekeepers of the eastern trade. Archaeological excavations at key sites such as Godin Tepe, Nush-i, and Baba Jan have provided the physical evidence that allows us to move beyond the Greek legends and the Assyrian administrative texts to reconstruct the actual material culture and settlement patterns of the Medes. Godin Tepe, located in the fertile Kangavar Valley, underwent a dramatic transformation in the late 8th and 7th centuries BC, with the construction of a large, well-fortified citadel that was clearly the seat of a powerful local ruler. The architecture featured a columned hall, a distinctively Iranian architectural form that anticipates the great audience halls of Persepolis and Pasargadae, showing the deep roots of Persian imperial architecture in the Median period. The discovery of administrative tablets, storage rooms filled with large jars for wine and oil, and evidence of a military garrison at Godin Tepe indicates a highly organized, centrally managed economy that was characteristic of a developing state. Tepe Nush-i, a remarkably well-preserved site near Malayr, provides an even more spectacular glimpse into the religious and political life of the Medes. The site features a central fire temple, a massive, mud-brick structure built on a high platform, with a blind window design and an inner sanctuary that was clearly used for the veneration of fire, a core ritual practice of the early Iranian religion that would later become central to Zoroastrianism. This temple is the earliest known example of its kind in Iran, demonstrating that the Median period was a crucial time for the development of the religious ideology that would later be adopted and adapted by the Achaemenid Persians. The material culture is unequivocal. The Medes were not a crude, disorganized horde. They were an innovative, complex society forging the templates for the Iranian imperial civilization to come. This unique combination of a formidable natural fortress, a productive mixed economy, a strategic position on the trade routes, and a developing political and religious infrastructure made Media the perfect crucible for the birth of a new kind of military power. By the mid-7th century BC, the Median chieftains who had learned the lessons of Assyrian military organization were beginning to apply them, transforming their tribal levies into a more disciplined and coordinated force. The Assyrians, by their very brutality, had provided the negative example that spurred unification. The memory of Assyrian atrocities, the mass deportations, the flaying of captured rebel leaders, the impalement of prisoners, vividly depicted on the palace reliefs that were themselves intended to terrorize, served as a permanent goad. The Medes were not merely fighting for tribute or territory, they were fighting for their very survival as a distinct people, and this existential threat forged a steely resolve and a willingness to adopt whatever political and military measures were necessary to break the Assyrian stranglehold. The stage was set for the emergence of the charismatic leaders, the Deioces and the Phraortes and the Cyaxares, who would channel this collective rage and ambition into a devastating weapon, a Median storm that would sweep down from the highlands and change the history of the world forever, extinguishing the hated Assyrian Empire and laying the foundations for the greater Persian Empire that would follow. The transition from the semi-mythical unification under Deioces to the aggressive, expansionist military campaigns of his son Phraortes marks the moment when the Median kingdom moved from a defensive coalition to an ambitious imperial power in its own right, a shift that is recorded in both the Greek historiographical tradition and the surviving fragments of Near Eastern chronicles. According to the narrative preserved in Herodotus, Deioces reigned for 53 years, a suspiciously long and symbolic period, during which he consolidated his authority, built the magnificent capital of Ecbatana, and established the rituals of a remote, secluded monarchy, where access to the king was strictly controlled through layers of court officials and messengers. A practice designed to elevate the ruler to a quasi-divine status. While the historical accuracy of these details is debated, the core memory of a foundational lawgiver and centralizer named Deioces is likely authentic, and some Assyrian records from the late 8th century refer to a powerful Median chieftain named Deioces who was deported by Sargon II for his rebellious activities, possibly the same historical figure. Upon the death of Deioces, his son Phraortes, known in the Old Persian form as Phraortes, ascended to the throne around 675 BC and radically transformed the policy of the Median state. Phraortes was not content with merely defending the highland territories against Assyrian incursion. He was an aggressive conqueror who sought to extend Median hegemony over the vast and diverse peoples of the Iranian plateau. Herodotus explicitly states that Phraortes first subjugated the Persians, a closely related Iranian tribe who lived in the region of Parsa, modern-day Fars province, to the south of Media, and who became the vassals of the Medes, setting the stage for the later, world-altering relationship between these two peoples. The subjugation of the Persians by Phraortes is a pivotal event, often glossed over, which established the political hierarchy that would persist for over a century. The Persians, led by their own local kings of the Achaemenid line, including the ancestors of Cyrus the Great, were forced to acknowledge Median suzerainty, to pay regular tribute, and to provide military contingents for the Median army. This was not a relationship of simple conquest, but a complex dynastic and feudal bond. The Persian kings became vassal kings, ruling their own territory but subordinate to the great king in Ecbatana. This arrangement was cemented, according to later traditions, by a marriage alliance between the Median and Persian royal houses, a practice that would culminate in the marriage of Cambyses I of Persia to Manane, the daughter of the Median king Astyages, a union that would produce the future Cyrus the Great. The Median overlordship over the Persians was not merely a political fact. It was a comprehensive cultural and military apprenticeship. The Persians, a smaller and less developed tribe at this time, were directly exposed to the sophisticated administrative practices, the advanced military organization, and the courtly culture of the Medes. They served in the Median army, learning the new cavalry tactics and the techniques of siege warfare that the Medes had adapted from the Assyrians. They witnessed the operation of a centralized state, with its system of taxation, its royal roads, and its elaborate protocol. The seeds of the future Achaemenid Empire were planted in this period of Median vassalage, as the Persian elite absorbed the lessons of imperial governance from their overlords, a process of cultural and political transmission that is the direct parallel to the way the Persians themselves had absorbed the Elamite administrative legacy. Having secured his southern flank and incorporated the Persians into his military system, Phraortes turned his attention to the broader plateau, embarking on a series of campaigns that extended Median control over a vast territory stretching from the borders of the Parthian steppes in the east to the kingdoms of Anatolia in the west. He subdued the various Iranian tribes that still lived in a state of political fragmentation across the plateau, forcing them to acknowledge his kingship and contribute to his growing war machine. This was a deliberate strategy of imperial consolidation, aimed at creating a unified power base from which to launch the ultimate prize, a decisive war against the Assyrian Empire, the great enemy that had for so long dominated and humiliated the Iranian peoples. The moment for this audacious move appeared to arrive after 653 BC, when the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, the last great ruler of the Neo-Assyrian dynasty, became embroiled in a devastating series of wars against his own rebellious brother Shamash-Shum-Ukin, the king of Babylon, a conflict that raged from 652 to 648 BC. This brutal civil war tore the heart out of the Assyrian Empire, consuming its vast military resources and shattering the aura of its invincibility. The southern provinces of the empire, including Babylon, Elam, and the Chaldean territories, were devastated by years of siege warfare, famine, and massacre, leaving the Assyrian state profoundly weakened and overextended. Phraortes, recognizing the unique strategic opportunity, judged that the time had come for the Medes to march down from their mountain strongholds and to confront the Assyrian army on the plains of Mesopotamia. The invasion, which Herodotus dates to the period around 635 BC, was a bold and risky gamble that ultimately ended in catastrophe for the Medes, demonstrating that the Assyrian military, though weakened, was still a formidable force when met in open battle. Phraortes led a large army, composed of his Median corps and contingents from his newly subjugated vassals, including Persians, into the heart of Assyrian territory. The exact location and details of the climactic battle are not recorded, but the result is brutally clear. The Median army was decisively defeated by the Assyrian forces, and Phraortes himself was killed on the battlefield, along with the greater part of his warriors. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who was still alive at this time, although near the end of his reign, likely recorded this victory in his annals, though the relevant portions of the Assyrian records are fragmentary. The death of Phraortes was a catastrophic blow to the fledgling Median kingdom, plunging it into a sudden and profound crisis. The nascent empire that Deioces and Phraortes had built was threatened with immediate dissolution. The subjugated Iranian tribes, seeing the Median king and his army destroyed, could have easily reasserted their independence, and the Assyrian Empire, though exhausted, could have potentially recovered its eastern hegemony. The future of the Medes, and indeed the entire political trajectory of the Iranian plateau, now depended entirely on the ability of a single man, Phraortes' son, Cyaxares, to salvage the disaster, to rebuild the shattered army, and to forge an even more powerful military machine capable of finally achieving the dream that had killed his father, the total annihilation of the Assyrian Empire. The ascent of Cyaxares, known to the Persians as Cyaxares, to the Median throne in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophic defeat and death of his father Phraortes is one of the most dramatic and transformative moments in the history of the ancient Near East. A true turning point where a potentially fatal crisis was converted into an unprecedented opportunity for imperial expansion. Cyaxares inherited a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The core Median army had been shattered on the plains of Assyria, the aura of Median invincibility had been obliterated, and the subject tribes, including the Persians, were doubtlessly assessing their chances of breaking away from the disastrous Median yoke. The Assyrian Empire, under the aging Ashurbanipal, was still licking its wounds from the Babylonian civil war but remained an existential threat. However, Cyaxares was a ruler of exceptional intelligence, ruthlessness, and organizational genius, a true revolutionary in military affairs. He immediately understood that the old tribal methods of warfare, which had served the Medes well in mountain skirmishes but had failed catastrophically in a set-piece battle against the Assyrian regulars, were no longer sufficient. He undertook a fundamental and comprehensive reform of the Median military machine, transforming it into a professional, disciplined, and tactically sophisticated force modeled on, but designed to surpass, the dreaded Assyrian army itself. Herodotus provides the crucial text for this transformation, stating that Cyaxares was the first to divide the Asian troops into separate, specialized corps of spearmen, archers, and cavalry, a revolutionary departure from the previous practice where every warrior fought with whatever weapons he had, in a single, undifferentiated mass. This military reform, meticulously implemented, converted the Median tribal host into a disciplined army capable of complex combined arms operations. The spearmen were organized into a heavy infantry corps, equipped with long iron-tipped pikes and protected by shields and armor, capable of forming a solid defensive line and withstanding the shock of enemy infantry and cavalry. The archers were trained as a mobile light infantry force, capable of laying down devastating volleys of arrows to disrupt enemy formations before the main engagement, a tactic that had been the hallmark of the Assyrian military but was now perfected by the Medes. Most importantly, Cyaxares expanded and professionalized the Median cavalry, transforming it from a loose collection of mounted tribal nobles into a formidable offensive striking arm. The Median horsemen, riding the magnificent Nicaean steeds, were equipped with bows for ranged harassment, and with swords and lances for the decisive charge. This heavy cavalry, the direct ancestor of the later Achaemenid and Parthian cataphracts, could deliver a concentrated shock against the flanks and rear of an enemy formation, a tactic that would prove decisive in the coming battles. The three specialized corps, spearmen, archers, and cavalry, were trained to operate in close coordination, a level of tactical integration that was far ahead of the Assyrian system, which, while sophisticated, still relied heavily on massive chariot charges and less coordinated infantry formations. The new Median army was a machine designed for a single, burning purpose: to return to the plains of Mesopotamia and inflict a total, annihilating revenge upon the hated Assyrian enemy. While Cyaxares was meticulously rebuilding the Median army, the geopolitical environment that had precipitated his father's failed invasion was shifting in ways that presented him with new, unexpected challenges and ultimately forced him to further hone his military instrument. The late 650s and 640s BC witnessed a period of immense turbulence across the entire Near East, as a new wave of nomadic invaders from the Eurasian steppes, the Scythians and the Cimmerians, erupted through the Caucasus passes and swept down into Anatolia and western Iran, causing widespread destruction and chaos. These horse-riding nomads, fighting as highly mobile mounted archers with no fixed settlements to defend, were a completely different kind of enemy from the Assyrian infantry. According to Herodotus, the Scythians, led by their king Medes, actually invaded Media itself, overwhelming the nascent Median army in a series of engagements and imposing their brutal, quasi-colonial overlordship on the Medes for a period of 28 years, a narrative that has been hotly debated by historians. While the 28-year duration is likely an exaggeration, and the nature of the Scythian rule is unclear, there is compelling evidence for a period of intense conflict and possibly Scythian dominance. Cyaxares, far from being destroyed by this new challenge, adapted his reformed army once again. The Median cavalry, already formidable, was forced to learn the ways of the steppe nomads, mastering their tactics of feigned retreat, their unparalleled mobility, and their devastating archery from horseback. This period of conflict with the Scythians, whether it was a temporary subjugation or a protracted guerrilla war, acted as a brutal finishing school for the Median military, toughening its soldiers and adding a new layer of tactical flexibility drawn directly from the steppe tradition. The end of the Scythian interlude, according to the Greek tradition, came about through a characteristically cunning and ruthless stratagem by Cyaxares. Herodotus recounts that after years of enduring the arrogant and oppressive behavior of the Scythian chieftains, who were living among the Medes as overlords, Cyaxares invited the Scythian leaders to a great banquet, during which he plied them with copious amounts of wine, a drink with which the steppe nomads were allegedly unfamiliar and to which they had low tolerance. Once the Scythian chieftains were hopelessly drunk and incapacitated, Cyaxares gave the signal, and his Median soldiers fell upon them and slaughtered them all, a drastic and bloody act of liberation. With their leaders decapitated, the Scythian hold on Media collapsed, and the surviving nomads were either driven out or absorbed into the Median military. While this story bears the hallmarks of a folkloric tale designed to illustrate the cleverness and ruthlessness of a national hero, the core truth is that Cyaxares did eventually succeed in neutralizing the Scythian threat and reasserting full control over Media. By the mid-610s BC, Cyaxares was in command of a battle-hardened, superbly trained, and tactically innovative army that had been forged in the crucible of Assyrian defeat and refined through the brutal skirmishes with the steppe nomads. He was now ready to execute the plan his father had died attempting, but this time he would not make the mistake of attacking the Assyrian giant alone. He would seek out a powerful and similarly motivated ally, a kingdom that shared his burning desire to see the Assyrian Empire annihilated and its capital cities reduced to smoking ruins. The diplomatic masterstroke that ultimately sealed the fate of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was the formal military alliance between Cyaxares of Media and Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, a union of two former subjects that was forged in a shared, burning hatred for their Assyrian oppressors and a mutual recognition that neither could achieve total victory alone. Nabopolassar, a Chaldean warlord from the southern marshlands of Mesopotamia, had seized the throne of Babylon in 626 BC amid the chaos that followed the death of the great Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in 627 BC. The once invincible empire was now in a state of rapid disintegration, racked by civil war, economic collapse, and a succession of weak and ineffective rulers who could not manage the vast territories that Ashurbanipal had brutally held together. Nabopolassar immediately began a relentless military campaign to expel the Assyrian garrisons from Babylonian cities and to assert Babylonian independence, engaging the Assyrian armies in a grueling, back-and-forth war of sieges and counter-sieges across the devastated plains of Mesopotamia. He was a tenacious and capable general, but he quickly realized that Babylon alone could not deliver the final, crushing blow against the core Assyrian cities in the north. He needed a powerful ally who could open a second front, a hammer to strike the Assyrian heartland from the east while his own forces served as the anvil. His gaze turned to the Medes, the fierce highlanders who had been a thorn in Assyria's side for centuries, and who, under the leadership of the newly resurgent Cyaxares, were once again a formidable military power. The exact diplomatic mechanism by which the alliance was cemented in 615 BC is not recorded in explicit detail, but the cuneiform chronicles, particularly the Babylonian chronicle known as the Fall of Nineveh Chronicle, provide a terse but dramatic narrative of the subsequent military coordination. The Babylonian text describes how, in the month of Simanu, May/June, of 615 BC, Cyaxares led the Median army down from the mountains and attacked the Assyrian province of Arapha, the modern city of Kirkuk, conquering the region and advancing toward the Assyrian core. This was the opening move of the coordinated offensive. In the following year, the armies of the Medes and Babylonians, after a period of initial, tentative maneuvering, met formally and King Cyaxares and King Nabopolassar concluded a treaty of alliance on the battlefield. To seal the pact, which was a momentous event of literally world-changing significance, Cyaxares' daughter, the Princess Amytis, was given in marriage to Nabopolassar's son, the Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar. This dynastic marriage, the union of the Median and Babylonian royal houses, created a powerful bond of blood that solidified the military alliance and forged a political axis that would dominate the Near East for the next generation. The stage was now set for a coordinated, twin-pronged assault that would systematically destroy the remnants of Assyrian power, a campaign that the two kings carried out with a level of strategic cooperation and merciless efficiency that was unprecedented. The first major target of the joint Median-Babylonian offensive was the ancient and sacred city of Assur, the religious heartland of the Assyrian Empire, named after its patron god and the very source of Assyrian cultural and ideological identity. In 614 BC, Cyaxares led the Median army on a rapid march down the Tigris River and fell upon the city of Assur with overwhelming force. The Babylonian chronicle states that the Medes attacked the city of Assur and destroyed it, and inflicted a terrible massacre upon its people, and plundered it, and the Babylonians came too late for the battle. This brief, chilling entry communicates the totality of the destruction. The city, which had been continuously occupied since the early 3rd millennium BC and was filled with magnificent temples and palaces, was stormed, systematically looted, and then razed to the ground. The population was put to the sword in a deliberate act of terror, a calculated repayment for the centuries of Assyrian atrocities visited upon the Medes and other subject peoples. The sacred temple of the god Assur was desecrated and destroyed, a psychological blow of incalculable magnitude that announced to the entire world that the divine protection of the Assyrian Empire had been irrevocably withdrawn. When Nabopolassar and the Babylonian army finally arrived on the scene, the city was already a smoldering ruin. He met with Cyaxares among the ashes of the ancient city, and there they renewed their treaty of alliance, standing as it were on the corpse of the Assyrian god, and prepared for the final, climatic campaign against the great imperial capital of Nineveh itself. The siege and destruction of Nineveh in 612 BC was the cataclysmic event that brought the Neo-Assyrian Empire to its violent and permanent end, an act of annihilation that sent shockwaves of joy and disbelief across the entire ancient world, celebrated in the Book of Nahum in the Bible and lamented in Greek and Mesopotamian sources. Nineveh was the largest city in the world at the time, a sprawling metropolis of over 750 hectares, on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, protected by a massive system of double walls that rose over 100 feet high, punctuated by 15 monumental gates, and surrounded by a moat engineered from the waters of the Kosor River. It was a city of legendary magnificence, filled with the vast palaces of Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, adorned with countless alabaster reliefs depicting the might and cruelty of the Assyrian kings, and housing the great library of Ashurbanipal, a treasure house of cuneiform knowledge. Against this seemingly impregnable fortress, Cyaxares and Nabopolassar marshaled their combined forces, the largest army that had ever been assembled in the region. The Babylonian Chronicle records the siege in stark, month-by-month detail. The assault began in the month of Simanu, with the Medes and Babylonians launching fierce attacks against the city walls. For 3 months, the siege raged, with the Assyrian defenders, commanded by their king Sin-Sariskin, resisting desperately. The turning point came in the month of Abu, July/August, when the swollen waters of the Tigris, perhaps manipulated by the besiegers, washed away a section of the city's massive defensive walls, breaching the fortifications that had stood inviolate for over a century. The Median and Babylonian soldiers poured through the gap, and the scene that followed was a nightmare of urban warfare, as the infuriated conquerors, who had endured generations of Assyrian terror, unleashed a horrific vengeance. The final sack of Nineveh was total and apocalyptic. The city was set ablaze, the flames consuming the palaces, temples, and the great library, baking the clay tablets with cuneiform writing into the fired bricks that archaeologists would discover over 2,000 years later, accidentally preserving the literary heritage of Mesopotamia. The Assyrian king Sin-Sariskin, according to one tradition, perished in the flames of his own palace, a final act of tragic defiance. The slaughter of the population was immense, so great that the biblical prophet Nahum describes the corpses as being piled in heaps in the streets. The colossal statues of the winged bulls and lions, the lamassu, that had guarded the palace gates for centuries were toppled and smashed, their faces mutilated in a symbolic act of ritual killing. The city that had been called the Lion's Den and the Bloody City by the prophets was reduced to a mound of ruins, so completely destroyed that its location was eventually forgotten, becoming a legend for 2 millennia until its rediscovery by Austen Henry Layard in the 19th century. The fall of Nineveh was not merely a military victory, it was the collective catharsis of 100 conquered nations, a volcanic eruption of pent-up hatred that extinguished the Assyrian flame forever. The Medes, under the iron will of Cyaxares, had achieved the impossible, avenging their ancestors and shattering the most terrifying empire the world had ever seen, and in doing so, they had irrevocably altered the course of world history. With the burning ruins of Nineveh as the symbol of their triumph, Cyaxares and Nabopolassar systematically pursued and annihilated the last remnants of the Assyrian military and political structure, extinguishing any possibility of a Neo-Assyrian resurgence. A surviving Assyrian general and prince, Assurbanipal II, had managed to escape the fall of Nineveh and retreated westward to the city of Haran, located strategically on the great trade routes of Upper Mesopotamia, where he proclaimed himself the legitimate Assyrian king and desperately sought to rally a final coalition of forces, including Egyptian troops sent by Pharaoh Necho II, who viewed a weakened Mesopotamia as a threat to Egyptian interests in the Levant. The Medes and Babylonians, unwilling to allow even this last ember of Assyrian power to glow, marched their combined forces to Haran and laid siege to the city in 610 BC. Assurbanipal and his Egyptian allies were forced to abandon Haran, retreating across the Euphrates River, and the ancient city, a center of the moon god Sin, was captured and devastated by the Medes, who reportedly destroyed the famous Temple of Sin, further demonstrating the thoroughness of their campaign to erase all symbols of the old order. The final, desperate attempt by Assurbanipal and a large Egyptian army to retake Haran in 609 BC was decisively defeated by the Medo-Babylonian forces, and the last Assyrian king vanishes from the historical record, presumably killed in the battle. The Assyrian Empire, which had existed in various forms for over 1,000 years, was now utterly and completely erased from the political map, its heartland a depopulated wasteland of ruined cities and abandoned fields, a testament to the terrifying effectiveness of the Median-Babylonian alliance and the totality of their vengeance. The successful destruction of the Assyrian Empire left Cyaxares as the master of a vast and newly acquired territory that stretched from the original Median heartland in the eastern Zagros across the entire northern Mesopotamian plain into the highlands of eastern Anatolia, including the former Assyrian core provinces and the former kingdom of Urartu, which had also been destroyed during the preceding decades of chaos. The partition of the Assyrian spoils between the victorious Medes and Babylonians was a pragmatic arrangement based primarily on the geographic reality of their respective spheres of operation. The Babylonians, under Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar, assumed control over the great Mesopotamian alluvium, the cities of Babylon, Uruk, Nippur, and the former Assyrian territories south of the Euphrates, and the rich Levantine provinces of Syria and Palestine, which they would soon vigorously contest with Egypt in a series of campaigns that culminated in the famous Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. The Medes, meanwhile, claimed the vast, mountainous territories to the north and east of the Tigris River, including the Assyrian heartland around the ruined cities of Nineveh, Assur, and Calhu, as well as the former kingdom of Urartu around Lake Van, and the territories of the Manaeans. This division gave the Medes control over the strategic highlands and the critical passes leading into Anatolia, setting the stage for the next phase of their imperial expansion, which would bring them into direct conflict with the powerful and wealthy kingdom of Lydia. The consolidation of Median control over the newly won northern territories was a complex process of absorbing a bewildering array of former Assyrian vassals, semi-nomadic tribes, and the remnants of ancient kingdoms into a coherent imperial structure. Cyaxares did not simply impose a Median administration. The Medes, unlike the Assyrians, appear to have ruled with a lighter, more feudalistic hand, allowing local rulers to maintain a degree of autonomy so long as they pledged loyalty, paid tribute, and provided military contingents. The region of Urartu, the ancient and powerful kingdom centered on Lake Van that had for centuries rivaled Assyria, had been decimated by the Scythian and Cimmerian invasions and the final Assyrian campaigns, and it was peacefully absorbed into the growing Median sphere of influence, its surviving population and fortresses becoming an integral part of the Median highland territory. This expansion gave the Medes direct access to the rich mineral resources of Anatolia, particularly the iron and silver mines that were essential for the economy of the ancient world, and it brought the Median frontier up to the Halys River, the modern Kızılırmak, which formed the eastern border of the wealthy and powerful Lydian kingdom. The stage was thus set for a direct, climactic confrontation between the expanding Median Empire and the formidable Lydian state, ruled by King Astyages of the Mermnad dynasty, a conflict that would test the strength of both powers and would be resolved in one of the most extraordinary and legendary events in ancient history. The war between Media and Lydia, which erupted around 590 BC and raged for 5 long and bloody years, was a titanic struggle for control of the Anatolian plateau, a conflict that pitted the newly professionalized Median army, with its formidable cavalry and iron discipline, against the wealthy and well-armed Lydians, who were renowned for their own expert cavalry and for being the first people in history to mint and use standardized gold and silver coinage. The Lydian king, Astyages, was a formidable opponent, a patient and strategic ruler who had spent his reign consolidating Lydian power, expelling the Cimmerian invaders from Anatolia, and constructing a vast, defensible network of fortresses. The war consisted of a series of massive, indecisive pitched battles and prolonged, grinding campaigns of maneuver across the central Anatolian highlands, with either side able to achieve a decisive advantage over the other. Herodotus provides a detailed account of the conflict, describing the immense armies that clashed year after year, leaving the landscape devastated but the strategic balance unchanged. The war exhausted both empires, draining their treasuries and manpower, and as the sixth campaigning season began in 585 BC, the two great hosts once again drew up their battle lines against each other on the plains near the Halys River, prepared for yet another bloody and inconclusive slaughter. It was at this precise moment that the natural world intervened in a manner so terrifying and awe-inspiring that it instantly halted the war and reshaped the geopolitical order. The event that brought the devastating Median-Lydian War to an abrupt and legendary conclusion was the famous Eclipse of Thales, a solar phenomenon that occurred on May 28, 585 BC, and which has been immortalized as one of the most extraordinary moments of scientific prediction and divine intervention in the annals of ancient history. The Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus, one of the 7 sages of antiquity and a man renowned for his knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and natural philosophy, had, according to the account preserved by Herodotus, predicted to the Ionians that a solar eclipse would occur in that very year, a prophecy that was apparently known to the warring kings. As the Median and Lydian armies were locked in a fierce and indecisive battle, the sky began to darken unnaturally in the middle of the day. The sun, the source of all life and the ultimate symbol of divine power in the ancient Near East, was slowly and inexorably consumed by the black disk of the moon, turning the bright afternoon into a terrifying twilight. The soldiers on both sides, who were accustomed to interpreting celestial phenomena as direct and urgent messages from the gods, were seized with a superstitious panic, believing that the gods were expressing their wrath at the endless and fruitless bloodshed. The clashing of weapons faltered and stopped, and the warriors stared in awe and terror at the darkened heavens. King Astyages of Lydia and King Cyaxares of Media, witnessing the profound psychological impact of the eclipse on their troops, immediately agreed to a cessation of hostilities, recognizing that the gods themselves had commanded an end to the war. The peace negotiations that followed the eclipse of Thales were conducted with urgency and diplomatic skill, facilitated by the mediation of Cyaxares, the king of Cilicia, and Nabonidus, who is generally identified with King Nabonidus of Babylon, a neutral party whose involvement underscores the interconnected nature of Near Eastern diplomacy. The terms of the peace treaty were generous and strategically astute, designed to create a lasting and stable border between the two great powers. The Halys River, which had been the nominal frontier and the site of so much fruitless combat, was formally established as the permanent boundary between the Median and Lydian empires, with the Medes controlling all territory to the east of the river and the Lydians retaining Anatolia to the west. This border was not merely a line on a map. It was a carefully demarcated and mutually agreed upon frontier that would be respected for generations, defining the westernmost limit of the Median and later, the Persian sphere of influence until the conquests of Cyrus the Great. To further cement the peace and forge a durable dynastic alliance, the treaty was sealed with a royal marriage. Astyages gave his daughter, the Lydian princess Iranian, in marriage to Cyaxares' son, the Median crown prince Astyages. This union of the two powerful dynasties created a bond of kinship that pacified the frontier and incorporated the Lydian kingdom into the broader diplomatic network of the Median state, a brilliant stroke of statesmanship that secured the western border and allowed the Median Empire to consolidate its vast territories. The exact date of the eclipse of Thales, May 28, 585 BC, calculated by modern astronomers using the precise mechanics of the solar system, is a cornerstone of ancient chronology because it provides a rare, fixed, and absolutely certain point around which the dates of earlier and later historical events can be calibrated. The ability of Thales to predict the eclipse, if the tradition is historically accurate, is a matter of intense scholarly debate. Thales could not have known the modern, heliocentric model of the solar system necessary to calculate the exact path of an eclipse. However, he may have had access to the Babylonian astronomical records, which meticulously tracked lunar and solar cycles over centuries and had identified the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years after which eclipses tend to repeat with similar characteristics. By consulting these Babylonian tables, Thales could have predicted that an eclipse was statistically likely to occur in that year, a probability forecast rather than a precise astronomical calculation. Regardless of the mechanism, the prophecy, whether accurate or a later attribution, was a powerful testament to the growing prestige of Greek natural philosophy and to the profound influence of Mesopotamian astronomy on the intellectual life of the Mediterranean world. For the Medes and Lydians, however, the eclipse was not a scientific curiosity but a terrifying and unambiguous divine mandate, a visible sign that the gods wished the fighting to cease, and the treaty that resulted from it was a permanent and respected monument to that divine intervention. The end of the Lydian War allowed the aged King Cyaxares to turn his attention back to the continued consolidation and organization of the vast Median Empire, which now stretched from the Halys River in Anatolia to the borders of the Parthian steppes in the east, and from the northern shores of the Black Sea to the former Elamite territories in the south. A realm of staggering diversity and immense potential that was the first true Iranian empire. Cyaxares did not attempt to impose a rigid, Assyrian-style provincial administration over this vast territory. The Medes, lacking the deep bureaucratic traditions of Mesopotamia, relied on a more flexible and feudal system of governance. conquered kings and local dynasts were frequently left in place as vassals, required to swear oaths of personal loyalty to the Median king, to pay an annual tribute that was probably a fixed amount of silver, horses, and military manpower, and to contribute their personal contingents to the Median army when called upon for major campaigns. This system created a large, decentralized, but still cohesive empire, where the central authority in Ecbatana was recognized, but a high degree of local autonomy was permitted. The Persian kingdom under the Achaemenid dynasty continued as one of the most important of these vassal states, a subordinate but respected partner in the imperial enterprise. The death of Cyaxares, the great warrior king and the true founder of the Median imperial power, likely occurred around 585 BC, shortly after the conclusion of the peace with Lydia, and he was succeeded peacefully by his son Astyages, who inherited an empire that was the dominant power in the Near East, secure in its borders and rich in the tribute of its numerous subject peoples. The reign of Astyages, the son of Cyaxares and the last independent king of Media, is a period of extraordinary historical significance, shrouded in a complex mixture of Greek legend, Near Eastern chronicle fragments, and the retrospective propaganda of the triumphant Achaemenid Persians, making it a particularly difficult and fascinating period to reconstruct with confidence. Astyages inherited a vast, prosperous, and seemingly secure empire from his father, a realm that had humbled Assyria, fought Lydia to a negotiated peace, and commanded the allegiance of vassal states stretching from the mountains of Anatolia to the plateau of Iran. According to the Greek tradition preserved by Herodotus and Ctesias, Astyages was a tyrannical and superstitious king, whose reign was marred by court intrigue, oppressive rule, and a series of prophetic dreams that foretold his eventual downfall at the hands of his own grandson, the future Cyrus the Great. The most famous of these legends recounts how Astyages dreamt that his daughter, the Princess Mandain, urinated so copiously that the golden stream flooded all of Asia, a dream that the Magi, the Median priestly caste, interpreted as an omen that her son would usurp the Median throne. Terrified by this prophecy, Astyages married Mandain not to a powerful Median noble who could threaten his rule, but to a relatively obscure and subordinate Persian vassal, Cambyses I, the king of Anshan, whom he considered a safe and unthreatening match. When Mandain became pregnant, Astyages had a second, even more terrifying dream, in which a gigantic vine grew from Mandain's womb and spread its tendrils to cover the entire world, an image that the Magi again interpreted as signifying the universal dominion of the unborn child. Determined to prevent the prophecy from being fulfilled, Astyages, according to the Herodotian narrative, took the most drastic and cruel measures imaginable. When Mandain gave birth to a son, whom she named Cyrus, Astyages summoned his trusted and ruthless general, Harpagus, a member of the Median royal clan, and commanded him to take the infant and kill him. Harpagus, though loyal to the king, was revolted by the prospect of murdering a royal child and, moreover, was afraid of the vengeance that Mandain might eventually exact upon him. He therefore delegated the horrific task to a shepherd named Mithridates, who lived in the wild, mountainous region north of Ecbatana, and who was himself a slave of Astyages. The shepherd's wife, whose name is recorded as Spako, which is the Median word for dog, had just given birth to a stillborn child, and the grieving couple, in a complex mixture of compassion and pragmatic calculation, decided to expose their own dead infant on the mountainside dressed in the royal garments of Cyrus, and to raise the living Persian prince as their own son. This substitution, one of the most famous and psychologically charged episodes in ancient historiography, sets in motion a chain of events that would lead inexorably to the fulfillment of the prophetic dreams. The legendary tale, with its themes of the exposed hero, the unwitting salvation of the future king, and the tragic impotence of tyranny in the face of destiny, is a masterful narrative, but its historical veracity is, of course, intensely debated among modern scholars. The discovery of the young Cyrus's true identity and royal birth, according to the story, occurred when he was 10 years old, playing a game of king with the other village boys. The charismatic and natural leader, Cyrus was chosen by his playmates as their king and, in his regal role, ordered the son of a prominent Median nobleman, who was among the children, to be beaten for disobedience. The nobleman, Artambares, was outraged that the son of a lowly shepherd would dare to lay hands on a boy of noble birth and complained directly to King Astyages. When Cyrus was brought before Astyages to account for his behavior, the king was struck by the boy's remarkable poise, dignity, and a certain physical resemblance to his own family. Through a series of intense and threatening interrogations, the truth of the baby exchange was eventually extracted from the terrified shepherd, and the horrified Harpagus was summoned to confess his disobedience. Astyages, masking his fury with a chilling calm, initially spared the boy and sent him back to his biological parents, Cambyses and Manaen, in Persia, having been reassured by the Magi that the prophecy had been symbolically fulfilled by Cyrus's childhood game of kingship and that he no longer posed a threat. However, the terrible revenge that Astyages inflicted upon the disloyal Harpagus is a centerpiece of the legend, a shocking act of cruelty that illustrates the king's increasingly paranoid and tyrannical nature. Astyages invited Harpagus to a banquet and secretly ordered the execution of Harpagus's own young son, whose body was then butchered, cooked, and served to the unsuspecting father during the feast, a horrific, Thyestean banquet that would have permanently ingrained itself in the Median consciousness as the ultimate act of royal savagery. Whether this entire narrative is a historical account, a foundation myth, or a piece of clever Persian propaganda designed to legitimize Cyrus's overthrow of his Median overlord, the underlying reality it points to is that the reign of Astyages was marked by increasing tension between the Median central court and the powerful Persian vassal kingdom under the Achaemenid dynasty. The story of Harpagus, the humiliated and vengeful general who was fed his own son's flesh, provides the narrative with a powerful motive for his subsequent betrayal. According to Herodotus, the still furious Harpagus began a secret correspondence with the now-grown Cyrus, who was living in the Persian capital of Anshan, urging him to rebel against the cruel and weakened Astyages and promising the support of a significant faction of disaffected Median nobles, who had grown weary of Astyages' oppressive rule and his flaunting of traditional noble privileges. The ground was thus prepared for a Persian revolt that would, in a remarkably short and decisive campaign, overturn the Median Empire and transfer the mantle of Iranian imperial power from the house of Cyaxares to the house of Achaemenes, in a transition that was, in reality, far more complex and multifaceted than a simple conquest, being more akin to a dynastic coup within the broader Iranian elite, with the Persians emerging as the new dominant partner in the Iranian imperial project. The rebellion of Cyrus the Great against his Median overlord Astyages, which began around 553 BC, was a supremely well-executed military and political campaign that lasted 3 years and resulted in the complete overthrow of the Median kingdom, an event that would have profound and lasting ramifications for the entire ancient world. Cyrus, who had succeeded his father Cambyses I as the vassal king of Anshan, was, according to the combined Greek and Near Eastern sources, a leader of extraordinary charisma, strategic brilliance, and diplomatic skill. The revolt began when Cyrus, emboldened by the secret promises of support from the disaffected Median general Harpagus and other nobles, openly declared his defiance of Astyages and ceased to pay the customary tribute. The initial Persian force, a relatively small army of tough and loyal highlanders from Pharos, was outnumbered by the massive Median host that Astyages personally led to crush the insurrection. The first major engagement of the war occurred at the Battle of Horde, a location that is not precisely identified but was likely near the border between the Persian and Median heartlands. Herodotus describes the battle as fiercely contested, with the Persians fighting with desperate courage against the larger Median army, but the outcome was indecisive, and the Persian forces were forced to retreat to the mountain passes to regroup. Astyages, perhaps believing that the rebellion had been effectively contained, did not pursue the defeated Persians into their rugged homeland with sufficient vigor. The second year of the revolt saw Cyrus engaged in a systematic campaign to consolidate his support and rally the Persian tribes to his cause, a period of intense political activity as much as military preparation. He was able to unite all the Persian clans under his banner, persuading them that the moment had come to throw off the Median yoke and to claim the imperial destiny that, according to later Achaemenid propaganda, the gods had reserved for them. The critical event, however, was the internal betrayal of Astyages by a significant faction of the Median nobility, a betrayal that the Greek sources attribute directly to the machinations of the vengeful Harpagus. When Astyages marched again into Persia in 550 BC with the main Median army, he placed Harpagus in command of a large contingent, and this turned out to be a fatal error. At the decisive Battle of Pasargadae, which was fought on the plains near the future site of Cyrus's magnificent capital, the Persian army, now well prepared and fighting on its own chosen ground, engaged the Medes. At the crucial moment of the battle, Harpagus and a substantial portion of the Median army deliberately defected to the side of Cyrus, either by refusing to fight, by withdrawing from the field, or by actively turning their weapons against the loyalist Median forces. This massive and coordinated betrayal shattered the Median line and threw the loyalist troops into complete and irredeemable confusion. The army of Astyages was routed, and the Medes who remained loyal were slaughtered in large numbers. The aftermath of the Battle of Pasargadae was a swift and decisive collapse of the Median imperial structure. The defeated Astyages, still a formidable figure, retreated northward to his capital at Ecbatana and attempted to organize a final, desperate resistance, conscripting all remaining able-bodied men in the city for a last stand. However, Cyrus, displaying the same relentless and swift pursuit that would later characterize all his campaigns, did not give his enemy time to regroup. The Persian army advanced rapidly into Media, capturing the outlying cities and fortresses that had lost their will to resist after the catastrophic defeat and the defection of their nobles. The final assault on Ecbatana was, according to the chronicles, a relatively brief affair. The great capital, with its legendary 7 concentric walls, was captured by Cyrus, though the Greek tradition suggests that the city was taken with relatively little physical destruction, a demonstration of the calculated clemency that would become the hallmark of Cyrus's imperial policy. Astyages himself was captured alive and brought before Cyrus. In a remarkable departure from the standard Near Eastern practice of brutal execution for captured rebel kings, Cyrus treated Astyages with respect and clemency, sparing his life and, according to one tradition, keeping him as an honored member of his court until his death. This act of mercy was a profoundly effective propaganda tool, designed to demonstrate to the Median nobility and to the other subject peoples of the former empire that Cyrus was not a foreign barbarian but a legitimate and magnanimous successor, a true king of kings who would rule with justice rather than terror. The incorporation of the Median Empire into the newly proclaimed Achaemenid Persian Empire was not the subjugation of a conquered enemy but the merger of two closely related Iranian powers, with the Medes becoming, in many respects, the senior partners in the imperial project alongside the Persians. Cyrus, recognizing the immense prestige and administrative experience of the Median aristocracy, adopted a deliberate policy of reconciliation and co-optation. He retained the Median capital of Ecbatana as the summer capital of the Persian Empire, a city that would remain one of the primary imperial residences for 2 centuries. He appointed Median nobles to high positions in his court and military, famously retaining the services of Harpagus, the very general who had betrayed Astyages, and entrusting him with the command of the crucial western campaigns that would eventually conquer the Lydian kingdom and the Greek cities of Ionia. The Median system of administration, the court protocol, the ceremonial dress of the king, the elite cavalry tactics, and the very concept of the King of Kings, the Shahanshah, were all adopted and perpetuated by the Achaemenids. The famous Persian immortals, the elite corps of 10,000, and the elaborate rituals of the Persian court, described in such detail by the Greek writers, were largely Median in origin. The Median Empire, as an independent political entity, had lasted only a brief century, but its shadow, the profound cultural, military, and political legacy it bequeathed to its Persian successors, would endure for over 200 years and would indelibly shape the character of the greatest empire the ancient Near East had ever seen. The integration of the Median military elite and their sophisticated tactical doctrines into the newly formed Achaemenid army was perhaps the most immediately consequential legacy of the Persian absorption of the Median state, creating a war machine of unprecedented flexibility and power that would conquer the known world. The Medes, under Cyaxares, had perfected the combined arms model that combined disciplined infantry, expert archers, and a devastating heavy cavalry, a system that was far more advanced than the traditional Persian tribal warfare that Cyrus had initially commanded. After the fall of Ecbatana, Cyrus did not disband or humiliate the Median army. Instead, he incorporated the intact Median military units directly into his own forces, placing Median generals and troops in positions of high command and honor. The Medes, renowned for their skill as horsemen and their expertise in the use of the long spear and the composite bow, became the backbone of the Achaemenid cavalry and a significant component of the elite infantry. The famous Achaemenid combined arms formation, where a solid wall of shielded spearmen, the sparabara, protected ranks of archers who unleashed a continual hail of projectiles, while units of heavy cavalry launched decisive charges on the flanks, was a direct inheritance from the Median military reforms of Cyaxares. When Cyrus later faced the wealthy King Croesus of Lydia at the Battle of Thymbra in 546 BC, he employed a brilliant tactical innovation, using a screen of camels to frighten the famed Lydian cavalry. But the core of his line, the infantry that withstood the Lydian charge and the cavalry that executed the counterattack, was composed largely of seasoned Median veterans. The role of the Medes in the subsequent Achaemenid conquests under Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius was consistently that of senior and trusted partners in empire, not conquered subjects. The Median general Harpagus, whose fateful betrayal had delivered the victory to Cyrus at Pasargadae, was entrusted with the crucial and difficult command of the Western Front following the conquest of Lydia. While Cyrus returned to the east to campaign against the Scythian tribes of Central Asia, Harpagus led the Median and Persian forces in a systematic campaign to subjugate the Greek cities of the Ionian coast, the Carians, the Lycians, and the other peoples of Anatolia, a task that required both military prowess and diplomatic finesse. The Greek cities, which had refused to submit to Cyrus's earlier overtures, were besieged and conquered one by one, with Harpagus employing the advanced Median siegecraft techniques, including the construction of massive earthwork ramps to overcome the formidable fortifications of cities like Phocaea and Teos. The brutal efficiency of the Median general in reducing these cities, and the policy of deporting the populations of the most recalcitrant, was a direct continuation of the military practices that the Medes had learned from their Assyrian enemies and turned against them. The fact that Cyrus placed such immense military and administrative authority in the hands of a Median nobleman is the clearest possible evidence of the deeply integrated, binational character of the early Achaemenid Empire, an empire that was as much a Median creation as a Persian one. The administrative structures of the Achaemenid Empire, while often attributed solely to the organizational genius of Darius the Great, were also profoundly indebted to the Median precedent of a centralized, tributary empire that had replaced the more brutal and extractive Assyrian model. The Median Empire, during its brief period of dominance, had developed a practical system for governing a vast and diverse territory through a combination of direct royal administration in the core heartlands and a network of vassal kingdoms and semi-autonomous satrapies in the peripheral regions. The title, King of Kings, Shahanshah in Persian, which was the official title of all Achaemenid monarchs, was itself a Median conceptual import. The Medes, having absorbed the diverse kingdoms of Urartu, the Mannaeans, and the Assyrian heartland, had governed their empire through a hierarchy of subordinate kings, who owed allegiance to the great king in Ecbatana, and this conception of a supreme monarch ruling over a network of lesser, vassal rulers was adopted wholesale by Cyrus and his successors. The Achaemenid satrapy system, which was later standardized and systematized by Darius I, likely had its origins in the ad hoc administrative arrangements of the Median period, where strategic regions were assigned to trusted Median nobles who were responsible for collecting tribute and maintaining military readiness. The Persians, with their deeper exposure to the Elamite scribal tradition, were able to build a more sophisticated bureaucratic apparatus on top of this Median foundation, but the foundational concept of a super-regional, tribute-based imperial state was a Median innovation. The cultural prestige of the Medes within the Achaemenid Empire was immense, and the Median style of courtly life, dress, and ceremonial became the standard for the Persian nobility, reflecting the deep respect the conquerors held for their immediate predecessors. The Greek writers, who frequently interacted with the Achaemenid court, often used the terms Persian and Mede interchangeably, a confusion that reflects the genuine fusion of the two cultures. The elaborate court protocol of the Achaemenid king, including the practice of proskynesis, the ritual bow or prostration before the monarch, was a Median tradition that the Persians adopted. The royal robe, the loose, pleated garments that are so distinctly visible in the reliefs at Persepolis, was of Median origin, and the Persians, who originally wore simpler, tighter-fitting clothing, adopted the Median style as the formal dress of the court. The capital at Persepolis, though a Persian foundation, was decorated with reliefs depicting the royal guard and the tribute bearers in their various national costumes, and the Median delegates, wearing their distinctive round caps and knee-length tunics, are always depicted as honored and prominent participants, often leading the delegations or mingling as equals with the Persian nobility. The Medes were not merely the first subjects of the Persian Empire. They were the co-architects of its imperial culture, the people who had forged the template of Iranian universal monarchy, and their shadow falls long and deep across the history of the Achaemenid dynasty, a silent testament to the empire that was conquered but whose spirit, institutions, and military prowess provided the essential foundation for the world-conquering power that would follow. The archaeological record of the Median period, while still frustratingly fragmentary compared to the abundant remains of their Assyrian and Achaemenid neighbors, has yielded several key sites that provide crucial, tangible evidence for the material culture, architecture, and religious practices of this foundational Iranian kingdom, allowing us to test and refine the often sensational accounts of the Greek historians. The most dramatic and enlightening of these sites is the remarkable fortress temple complex at Tepe Nush-i, a lone, windswept mud brick ruin located on a rocky outcrop in the desolate highlands of the Malaya Plain, about 60 kilometers south of Hamadan, the ancient Ecbatana. The site, which was meticulously excavated by a British team led by David Stronach in the 1960s and 1970s, proved to be a perfectly preserved, single-period Median religious and administrative center that had never been overbuilt or disturbed by later occupation. The central and most visually arresting structure is a compact, exceptionally well-preserved fire temple, built entirely of mud brick, with a cruciform plan and a series of blind windows on its exterior, surrounding a central chamber that once housed a sacred fire altar. The architecture is austere, powerful, and distinctly non-Mesopotamian, representing a purely Iranian religious tradition that is a direct predecessor to the later Zoroastrian fire temples of the Sasanian period. Adjacent to the fire temple are a massive, columned audience hall, evidence of the administrative and political function of the site, a storage fortress with long, narrow magazines, and a series of deeply buried tunnels that may have been used for hiding valuables or for ritual purposes, though their exact function remains a mystery. The deliberate and careful infilling of the entire complex with shale and stone by the Medes themselves, shortly after its construction, prior to their abandonment of the site in the 6th century BC, created a sealed time capsule that preserved the mud brick walls to an astonishing height. The material culture recovered from Tepe Nush-i, while not abundant, provides critical insights into the technology and economy of the Median state. The presence of large quantities of standardized storage jars, designed to hold grain, wine, or oil, indicates a centrally managed economy capable of collecting and redistributing agricultural surplus, a hallmark of a developed state apparatus. The discovery of a hoard of silver objects, including intricately decorated ingots and a beautifully crafted silver vessel, provides direct evidence of the wealth that was accumulating in the Median highlands, much of it likely derived from the control of the east-west trade routes. The pottery found at the site is a fine, buffware that is distinct from both Assyrian and earlier Iranian styles, showing the development of a new, distinctly Median ceramic tradition. The bronze and iron objects, including weapons like arrowheads and daggers, demonstrate a sophisticated metallurgical capability that was essential for equipping the reformed Median army. The absence of any significant Assyrian cultural material at the site, such as the distinctive glazed bricks or cuneiform inscriptions, is itself a powerful statement. Tepe Nush-i was a purely Iranian center, built by and for the emerging Median elite, and it consciously rejected the cultural symbols of the hated Assyrian oppressors. This archaeological snapshot, frozen in time, provides an authentic, unmediated glimpse into the world of the Medes, confirming the existence of a centralized state with its own distinctive architectural, religious, and economic identity. Another crucial archaeological window into the Median world is provided by the site of Godin Tepe, located in the fertile Kangavar Valley, an ancient and strategic location that guarded a major pass on the great trade route to the east. Godin Tepe, unlike the single-period Nush-i, was a multi-period site that had been occupied since the 4th millennium BC, but its most significant stratum, level 2, is a large, well-fortified Median citadel dating to the 7th century BC. The excavations, conducted by an American team, uncovered a massive defensive wall and a large columned hall, one of the earliest examples of this quintessentially Iranian architectural form, which would later be magnified to a breathtaking scale in the Ecbatana of Persepolis. The columned hall at Godin Tepe, with its rows of wooden columns supporting a flat roof, was clearly an audience hall or a reception room for a powerful local chief or governor, and its presence indicates the diffusion of Median architectural and political norms across the plateau. The fortifications at Godin Tepe, with their projecting towers and complex gate systems, show a sophisticated understanding of defensive military architecture that was a direct response to the constant threat of Assyrian, and later, Scythian incursions. The site also yielded evidence of a sudden and violent destruction by fire in the late 7th century BC, which may correspond to the period of chaos and conflict during the Scythian interlude, or the final struggles with the remnants of the Assyrian Empire. The subsequent Median level at Godin Tepe shows a less monumental and more domestic phase, suggesting the administrative center had shifted elsewhere, perhaps to the new royal capital at Ecbatana, but the site remained occupied. The elusive capital of Ecbatana, the legendary city of the 7 concentric walls, has proven far more difficult for archaeologists to excavate because it lies directly beneath the modern, bustling city of Hamadan, making large-scale, open-area excavations virtually impossible. However, limited soundings and chance discoveries have confirmed the presence of a massive Median and Achaemenid occupation layer on the ancient mound of Ecbatana, deep beneath the modern city streets. Gold and silver tablets, inscribed with the names of Achaemenid kings, have been discovered, as well as fragments of massive column bases and mud brick fortifications that attest to the monumental character of the ancient capital. While the 7 rainbow-colored concentric walls described by Herodotus have not been found and are likely a poetic exaggeration of the city's formidable defenses, the archaeological evidence confirms that a large, well-fortified, and wealthy royal center existed at Hamadan during the Median and Achaemenid periods. The strategic location of the city, at a high altitude with a famously pleasant summer climate, made it the perfect summer residence for the Median and later Persian kings, a place of retreat from the searing heat of Susa and Babylon. The Median tradition of a royal capital that was a symbol of unity, a fortified treasury, and a sacred administrative center was a model that was directly inherited by the Achaemenids, who built their own magnificent ceremonial capital at Persepolis, but who continued to use Ecbatana as a vital imperial residence, maintaining the deep connection between the Persian monarchy and its Median roots. The religious legacy of the Medes is a complex and deeply influential subject, as the Median period was a crucial time of spiritual fermentation and synthesis in which the various Iranian religious traditions, including the veneration of fire, the cult of the Magi priestly caste, and the early forms of Zoroastrian dualism, were consolidated and prepared for their later central role in the Achaemenid Empire. The Magi, one of the 6 tribes of the Medes listed by Herodotus, were not merely a secular tribe but a hereditary priestly caste who functioned as the keepers of religious ritual, the interpreters of dreams, and the advisors to the king on matters of divine will. Their power at the Median court, as illustrated by the central role they play in the stories of Astyages and his prophetic dreams, was immense, and they represented an organized, professional religious establishment that was unique in the Iranian world. The archaeological evidence from Tepe Nush-i, with its central fire temple, provides direct physical evidence for the ritual practice of fire veneration, which was at the heart of the Magi's religious duties. The temple was not an empty structure. The central sanctuary was carefully filled with clean shale at the time of its abandonment, a deliberate act of ritual decommissioning that indicates the profound sacredness of the space and the fire that once burned within it. The Magi carried this fire-centered worship with them into the Achaemenid period, where they became the official priests of the Persian court, accompanying the army on campaign and officiating at royal sacrifices, and their distinct costume and rituals became famous throughout the empire. The exact nature of the religion that the Magi practiced and promoted during the Median period is a subject of intense and ongoing scholarly debate, particularly its relationship to the teachings of the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, who is traditionally believed to have lived and preached in eastern Iran sometime between 1500 and 1000 BC. The religion of the Achaemenid kings, as expressed in their royal inscriptions at Behistun and Persepolis, is a strongly dualistic faith centered on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme wise lord, and the cosmic struggle against the lie, the Draga, a theological framework that is unmistakably Zoroastrian in its core concepts. However, the Achaemenid kings themselves never mention Zoroaster by name, and their religious practice, as revealed in the Persepolis tablets, included state-funded offerings to a wide variety of Iranian and Elamite deities, indicating a complex, polytheistic reality that was not strictly in line with the purist Zoroastrian monotheism of later centuries. The Medes, and the Magi in particular, were likely the crucial transmitters of Zoroastrian ideas into Western Iran, blending the prophet's original teachings with the older, polytheistic Iranian and Elamite religious traditions of the plateau. The Median period, therefore, was a critical era of religious synthesis in which the core Zoroastrian concepts of dualism, the sacredness of fire, and the rituals administered by a professional priestly caste were fused with the established traditions of the region to create the complex and flexible imperial religion of the Achaemenids, a system that was both deeply Iranian and pragmatically inclusive. The tradition of the Magi and the fire temple architecture pioneered in the Median period had a direct and enduring influence on the subsequent religious history of Iran, extending far beyond the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. When the Macedonian king Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, and the ensuing Seleucid period brought a wave of Hellenistic culture to the Iranian plateau, the Magi persisted as the guardians of Iranian religious identity, retreating to their local strongholds and preserving the sacred fire and the sacred texts. The Parthian Empire, which rose in the late centuries BC, was deeply influenced by the Magi, and the Parthian kings, though often religiously tolerant, patronized the Zoroastrian tradition and the fire temples. The Great Sasanian Empire, which was founded in 224 AD and consciously styled itself as the direct heir to the Achaemenids, formalized Zoroastrianism as the state religion, creating an established church with a rigid hierarchy, a codified scripture, the Avesta, and a network of magnificent, monumental fire temples that dotted the landscape of the empire. The Sasanian fire temples, with their distinctive domed square chambers and their eternal flames, were the architectural descendants of the mud brick prototype at Tepe Nush-i, a lineage that stretches directly from the Median highlands of the 8th century BC to the grand imperial architecture of the 6th century AD. The very concept of a state-sponsored, monotheistic, dualistic religion administered by a powerful priestly class, which was a defining feature of the Sasanian state, and which profoundly influenced the development of Christianity and Islam, has its deep historical roots in the Median crucible of the 7th century BC and the Magi who served the kings of Ecbatana. The intellectual and cultural influence of the Medes, transmitted through the powerful and enduring institution of the Magi, also extended into the Hellenistic and Roman worlds, where the Magi became legendary figures of exotic wisdom and esoteric knowledge. The Greek word magos, from which the English word magic is derived, originally referred specifically to the Median and Persian priestly caste, and the Greeks and Romans associated the Magi with a profound knowledge of astronomy, astrology, alchemy, and the occult. The famous story of the three wise men, or the Magi, who traveled from the east to Bethlehem to pay homage to the infant Jesus, as recounted in the Gospel of Matthew, is a direct reflection of the immense prestige that the Median and Persian priestly tradition held in the ancient world. These Magi, guided by a star and bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, were not imagined as simple Babylonian stargazers but as members of the exalted Iranian priestly caste, the guardians of a profound and ancient wisdom. The legend, whether historical or symbolic, encodes the recognition of the Median and Persian religious tradition as one of the great spiritual streams of antiquity, a tradition that had been forged in the highland fortresses and fire temples of Media, and which had, through the genius of its priestly class, achieved a worldwide reputation for mystical and philosophical profundity. The shadow of the Medes, therefore, stretches not only across the political and military history of the Near East but also across the spiritual and intellectual history of the Western world. The final assessment of the Median Empire's place in world history requires us to look beyond the brief century of its independent political existence, and to recognize its truly foundational role in the creation of the Iranian imperial model and its profound, albeit often indirect, influence on the subsequent development of world civilization. The Medes were the great destroyers of the old order, the force that finally and irrevocably shattered the seemingly invincible Assyrian Empire, an act of destruction so total that it permanently removed the most oppressive and militaristic power from the stage of the ancient Near East, clearing the ground for a new kind of empire to emerge. The Assyrian model of imperial governance, based on systematic terror, mass deportation, and the celebration of cruelty as a state policy, was annihilated alongside the walls of Nineveh. In its place, the Medes, in partnership with the Babylonians, began to construct a different kind of tributary state, one that relied more on vassalage, personal oaths of loyalty, and the incorporation of subject elites into the imperial structure, a model that was less brutally extractive and more politically sustainable in the long term. This fundamental shift in the nature of imperial rule, from a system of pure terror to a system of negotiated vassalage and aristocratic co-optation, was a Median innovation that was directly and consciously inherited and perfected by the Achaemenid Persians, who made it the ideological cornerstone of their world empire, as famously articulated in the Cyrus cylinder. The military revolution initiated by King Cyaxares, the division of the army into specialized corps of spearmen, archers, and cavalry, represents one of the most significant tactical innovations in the history of warfare, and it provided the Persians with the military instrument that would conquer the known world. The Median emphasis on heavy cavalry, the armored horsemen who could engage in both missile and shock combat, was a development that anticipated the famous cataphracts of the later Parthian and Sasanian empires, and indeed, the entire medieval European concept of the knight. The Median army, forged in the crucible of conflict with the Assyrians and the Scythians, was the first to effectively combine the disciplined, heavy infantry formations of the Mesopotamian tradition with the mobile, mounted archery tactics of the steppe nomads, a synthesis that created a combined arms force of unprecedented flexibility and lethality. The Achaemenid armies of Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius, which conquered Egypt, Anatolia, and the Indus Valley, were directly descended from this Median model, and many of their most effective units and most trusted generals were themselves Medes. The famous Persian immortals, the 10,000-strong elite guard, were an Achaemenid institution, but their equipment, their discipline, and their integration into a combined arms tactical system were the direct products of the military reforms of Cyaxares. Politically, the Medes provided the Persians with the very template of Iranian universal monarchy, the concept of the Shahanshah, the king of kings, ruling from a series of magnificent royal capitals over a diverse array of subject peoples who were bound to the throne by a combination of tribute obligations, dynastic marriages, and personal oaths of loyalty. The Persian court culture, with its elaborate protocol, its ceremonial robes, its powerful royal women, and its influential court eunuchs and advisors, was overwhelmingly Median in origin. The Achaemenid kings deliberately styled themselves as the legitimate heirs of the Median dynasty, and by sparing and honoring the deposed Astyages, Cyrus was making a calculated political statement that his rule was a continuation, not a rupture, of the Iranian imperial tradition. The Persians, a younger and less experienced tribe from the southern highlands, were the beneficiaries of the Median apprenticeship in empire. They inherited a fully functioning administrative state, a battle-tested army, a network of diplomatic relationships with the major powers of the region, and a legitimizing ideology that they were able to expand onto a global scale. The Median shadow, in this sense, was the very substance of the Persian achievement, the deep, dark, and fertile soil from which the golden tree of the Achaemenid Empire grew. In the long span of Iranian history, The Medes stand as the crucial bridge between the ancient, pre-Iranian civilizations of Elam and Mesopotamia and the fully realized imperial might of the Persians. They absorbed the lessons of the Bronze and early Iron Age empires, both their administrative techniques and their modes of military terror, and they transformed them into a new, distinctly Iranian synthesis. They were the first to forge the diverse, related tribes of the Iranian plateau into a single, unified, and aggressive imperial state with a clear sense of national mission. The memory of the Medes, though overlaid by the far more famous Achaemenid legacy, never completely faded. The Sasanian dynasty, which ruled Iran for over 4 centuries, looked back to the Cyaxares legendary kings, a mythologized lineage that blended the memories of the Avestan heroes, the Achaemenids, and the Medes into a single, glorious, pre-Hellenistic past. The word Median itself became, in the classical world, a byword for a certain kind of regal, luxurious, and powerful Oriental court culture. The Medes were the great precursors, the innovators, the destroyers of the old world and the architects of the new. Their empire was brief, but their impact was eternal, and understanding their story, the story of Deioces, Phraortes, Cyaxares, and Astyages, is absolutely essential to understanding the full, rich, and complex history of the Persian Empire and the civilization of ancient Iran. Theirs is the shadow that shaped the light of the greatest empire of antiquity. The overthrow of the Median king Astyages by his Persian vassal Cyrus the Great in 550 BC was not a conquest in the conventional sense of a foreign invasion, but rather a dynastic coup within the Iranian elite that transferred the mantle of imperial leadership from one branch of the Iranian family to another, with profound and immediate consequences for the administrative, military, and cultural fabric of the newly enlarged Achaemenid state. The Medes, far from being reduced to a subject population, were immediately integrated as the near-equal partners of the Persians in the imperial project, a deliberate policy of reconciliation that Cyrus pursued with characteristic strategic intelligence. The Median capital of Ecbatana, situated at a cool and strategic high altitude in the Zagros mountains, was retained as the summer royal residence of the Achaemenid kings, a status it would maintain for the entire 200-year duration of the empire, alongside the other imperial capitals of Susa, Babylon, and Persepolis. The administrative machinery of the Median state, though less sophisticated than the ancient Elamite bureaucratic tradition that the Persians also inherited, provided the essential framework of vassalage, tribute collection, and military levies that had successfully held the diverse territories of the northern Zagros, eastern Anatolia, and the former Assyrian heartland together. The Medes, who had learned the art of imperial governance through their long and brutal struggle with Assyria and their subsequent expansion under Cyaxares, possessed a cadre of experienced administrators, diplomats, and generals whose skills were indispensable to the rapidly expanding Achaemenid enterprise. The transition, therefore, was characterized not by the destruction of Median institutions but by their preservation, elevation, and integration into a new, larger, and more ambitious imperial synthesis that was now ready to expand beyond the boundaries that the Medes themselves had established. The role of the Median nobility and military elite in the conquests that immediately followed the Persian takeover was absolutely central, and the Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, provide vivid, detailed accounts of Median commanders leading the Achaemenid armies to victory in the most critical campaigns of the age. The most prominent and historically significant of these figures was Harpagus, the Median general whose betrayal of Astyages had proven decisive at the Battle of Pasargadae. Far from being a despised traitor, Harpagus was elevated by Cyrus to the position of the empire's most trusted and capable Western commander, a sign of the immense respect and authority that the Medes continued to command. When Cyrus himself turned his attention eastward to secure the vast, wild frontier of Central Asia against the Scythian and Massagetæ tribes, a campaign that would ultimately cost him his life in 530 BC, he entrusted Harpagus with the conquest and pacification of the remaining independent states of Western Anatolia, including the Greek cities of Ionia, the kingdoms of Caria and Lycia, and the remnants of the Lydian kingdom. Harpagus conducted these campaigns with a combination of relentless military efficiency and innovative siegecraft that reflected the accumulated military wisdom of the Median tradition. The Greek city of Phocea, a major maritime power, was besieged and its formidable walls were overcome by the construction of massive earthwork ramps, while the entire population, rather than submit to Persian rule, famously chose to abandon their city and sail into exile in the western Mediterranean, a tragic episode that illustrates the grim determination that the Median general brought to his task. The Carians and Lycians, renowned for their fierce independence and their formidable mountain fortresses, were subdued in a series of brutal campaigns, and the entire western coast of Anatolia was integrated into the Achaemenid satrapy system, a process that was directed and largely executed by Median officers and their veteran troops. The presence and influence of the Medes within the core structures of the Achaemenid state were not limited to the military sphere. They permeated the court, the administration, and the very ideology of Persian kingship in ways that have often been overlooked by historians focused on the more visible Persian and Elamite elements. The official title of the Achaemenid monarch, the Shahanshah, or King of Kings, which appears in all the royal inscriptions from Darius the Great onward, was a direct conceptual inheritance from the Median period, reflecting the feudal, multi-tiered sovereignty that the Medes had exercised over their diverse vassal kingdoms. The elaborate court protocol that so impressed and astonished Greek visitors to the Persian court, including the practice of proskynesis, the ritual bow or prostration before the monarch, was a Median tradition that the Persians adopted and codified into a rigid system of courtly hierarchy. The ceremonial dress of the Persian king and his courtiers, the long, flowing, pleated robes, the distinctive round caps, and the ornate jewelry, as depicted in the monumental reliefs at Persepolis, were of Median origin, and the Persian elite's adoption of this style represented a conscious cultural emulation of their immediate predecessors. The Persian immortals, the elite corps of exactly 10,000 infantry who served as the king's personal bodyguard and the shock troops of the empire, were organized and equipped according to the military reforms that had been instituted by Cyaxares, and it is highly probable that the original corps of the immortals was composed of Median veterans who had transferred their loyalty to the new Persian king. The Achaemenid Empire, in its most essential character, was a Perso-Median confederacy, a partnership between the two most powerful Iranian tribes, and the stability and longevity of the empire depended heavily on the successful maintenance of this delicate internal balance. The administrative integration of the vast Median territorial inheritance into the Achaemenid satrapy system, which was progressively formalized under the reigns of Cyrus, Cambyses, and particularly Darius the Great, was a complex process that adapted the older, more feudal Median methods of governance to the sophisticated bureaucratic traditions of Elam and Mesopotamia. The core Median territories, the region around Ecbatana and the ancient cities of the Zagros, were organized into the satrapy of Media, one of the most prestigious and important provinces of the empire, which paid a massive annual tribute of 450 silver talents, a quantity that reflected its immense agricultural wealth and its strategic importance. The satrap of Media was invariably a member of the extended Achaemenid royal family, or a trusted noble of the highest rank, and the province served as a critical military and logistical hub for the empire's operations in the west and north. The Median horse breeding traditions, which had produced the magnificent Nicaean steeds that were the envy of the ancient world, were a state monopoly, and the royal stud farms of Media provided the cavalry remounts that were essential for the Achaemenid army's mobility and striking power. The tribute lists and administrative tablets from Persepolis, written in the Elamite language that was the functional bureaucratic tongue of the empire, record the flow of Median silver, livestock, and manpower into the imperial coffers, demonstrating the complete integration of the Median economy into the centrally managed Achaemenid fiscal system. The Medes were not peripheral subjects, they were the core of the empire, and their territory, their resources, and their human capital were absolutely central to the maintenance of Achaemenid power. The enduring legacy of this deep Median integration into the Achaemenid system is visible in the very fabric of the empire's monumental art and architecture, where the Medes are consistently depicted as the honored equals and partners of the Persians. At the great ceremonial capital of Persepolis, the magnificent Ecbatana staircases, which were the visual centerpiece of the imperial ideology, are adorned with intricately carved reliefs depicting the annual tribute procession, in which delegates from every nation of the empire bring their characteristic gifts to the Shahanshah. The Persian and Median nobles, easily identifiable by their distinctive costumes, the Persians wearing fluted, upright tiaras and long, pleated robes, and the Medes wearing round, domed caps, tight-fitting tunics, and trousers, are shown walking arm in arm, in intimate and friendly conversation, ascending the stairs together as brothers in empire. There is no visual hierarchy of conqueror and conquered. The two Iranian peoples are depicted as the joint ruling elite of the world. The same pattern is visible in the glazed brick friezes of the palace at Susa, where the famous immortals are depicted in rows, alternating between Persian and Median uniforms, a literal representation of the binational composition of the imperial guard. This visual program was not merely decorative, it was a deliberate and powerful ideological statement, broadcast to the entire empire, that the Achaemenid state was a union of equals, a partnership forged in the crucible of the Median revolt and consecrated by the shared glory of world conquest. The shadow of the Medes, in this context, was not a darkness of subjugation but the brilliant, co-equal light of a shared imperial destiny, a testament to the enduring power of the synthesis that Cyrus the Great had so brilliantly engineered. The religious and ideological contributions of the Medes to the Achaemenid imperial synthesis are among the most profound and, paradoxically, the most difficult to trace with absolute precision, hidden as they are beneath the official Zoroastrian-tinged rhetoric of the Persian royal inscriptions and the complex, syncretic religious reality revealed by the Persepolis administrative tablets. The Medes, as we have seen, were the people of the Magi, the hereditary priestly caste that had consolidated its power during the Median period, serving as the advisors to the king, the interpreters of dreams, and the custodians of the sacred fire rituals that were at the heart of early Iranian religion. When Cyrus the Great overthrew Astyages, he did not suppress the Magi. He co-opted them, recognizing their immense influence over the Median population and their essential role in providing religious legitimacy to the new regime. The Magi became the official priests of the Achaemenid court, a position they would retain throughout the empire's history, and their distinctive rituals, costumes, and religious doctrines were incorporated into the fabric of imperial ceremonial. The Greek writers, who were intensely curious about the exotic religious practices of the Persians, consistently described the Magi as the indispensable officiants at royal sacrifices, the guardians of the sacred fire, and the interpreters of divine omens, and they often use the term magic to describe the arcane rituals and incantations that the Magi performed. The presence of the Magi at the very heart of Achaemenid power ensured that the Median religious tradition, with its emphasis on fire veneration, dualistic cosmology, and priestly mediation, became an integral and permanent component of Persian imperial culture. The specific theological doctrines that the Magi carried with them into the Achaemenid period are a matter of intense scholarly discussion, particularly the question of the precise relationship between the religion of the Medes and the teachings of the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra. The royal inscriptions of the Achaemenid kings, from Darius the Great at Behistun to Artaxerxes II at Susa, articulate a clear and consistent theology centered on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme, wise Lord, who is the creator of heaven and earth and the source of all truth, justice, and royal authority. The king is presented as the earthly agent of Ahura Mazda, who is engaged in a cosmic, Manichaean struggle against the forces of the lie, the Draga, which manifest in the world as rebellion, chaos, and false religion. This dualistic framework, with its stark division between good and evil, truth and falsehood, is unmistakably Zoroastrian in its core concepts, and it is highly probable that the Medes, and particularly the Magi, were the primary conduits through which these Zoroastrian ideas flowed from their probable origin in eastern Iran into the western Iranian courts of Ecbatana and Persepolis. However, the Achaemenid kings never mention Zoroaster by name, and the Persepolis tablets reveal a rich, complex religious economy in which state-funded offerings were regularly made not only to Ahura Mazda but also to a pantheon of other Iranian, Elamite, and even Mesopotamian deities. This suggests that the Magi, in their role as the official priesthood, presided over a broad, inclusive, and syncretic religious system that accommodated the diverse cults of the empire while maintaining the supreme position of Ahura Mazda, a pragmatic flexibility that was a direct inheritance from the Median tradition of religious assimilation. The architectural expression of this Median-born religious synthesis is most clearly visible in the development of the Fire Temple, a distinctively Iranian religious structure that was pioneered in the Median period, as evidenced by the remarkably preserved temple at Tepe Nush-i, and which was subsequently adopted and adapted by the Achaemenids and their successors. The Fire Temple at Nush-i, with its cruciform plan, its blind windows, and its inner sanctuary designed to hold the sacred, perpetually burning fire, was a purely Iranian creation, utterly distinct from the Mesopotamian temple complexes with their ziggurats and their multiple, anthropomorphic divine statues. The Achaemenid kings, although they did not construct monumental fire temples on the same scale as their later Sasanian successors, certainly patronized and maintained the existing fire temple establishments, and the sacred fire, the adder, was a central symbol of the imperial cult. The rock-cut tombs of the Achaemenid kings at Nush-i, with their imposing cruciform facades that tower over the plain, feature at their center a depiction of the king standing before a fire altar, raising his hand in a gesture of worship, while the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda hovers above. This iconic scene, repeated on multiple royal tombs and on the Behistun relief, encodes the essential elements of the Median and Persian royal religious ideology: the king, the fire, and the supreme god, a powerful trinity that legitimized the monarch's rule and visually proclaimed his piety to the world. The tradition of the fire altar as the central locus of royal devotion, which would reach its apogee in the magnificent Sasanian fire temples at places like Takhti Soliman, was a Median innovation that the Persians embraced and made the visual cornerstone of their imperial self-representation. The intellectual and cultural influence of the Median Magi extended far beyond the borders of the Achaemenid Empire, penetrating into the Greek and, later, the Roman world, where the figure of the Magus became a legendary archetype of exotic, oriental wisdom and esoteric knowledge. The Greek word magos, which is the direct etymological root of the English words magic and magician, originally and specifically designated a member of the Median and Persian priestly caste, and the Greek philosophers and historians, from Herodotus to Plato and Aristotle, were intensely fascinated by the doctrines and practices of the Magi. They were credited by the Greeks with a profound knowledge of the stars, a sophisticated dualistic theology, and the ability to interpret dreams and perform miraculous rituals, a reputation that, while often embellished and sensationalized, was grounded in the real intellectual and spiritual traditions of the Median priestly class. The famous story of the three wise men, or the Magi, who journey from the east to pay homage to the newborn Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, is the most enduring and culturally significant testament to the prestige of the Median and Persian priestly tradition in the wider ancient world. These Magi, guided by a celestial phenomenon and bearing precious gifts, were not portrayed as simple astrologers but as representatives of an ancient and noble spiritual tradition that recognized the divine significance of the Christ child. The legend encapsulates the deep and lasting impression that the Median religious synthesis, transmitted through the Magi, made on the spiritual imagination of the West, a legacy that continues to resonate in art, literature, and religious symbolism to the present day. The long-term resilience of the Magi and the religious traditions they embodied is a remarkable story of cultural survival in the face of conquest and political upheaval. When Alexander the Great destroyed the Achaemenid Empire in 330 BC, burning Persepolis and shattering the political framework of Persian power, the Magi did not disappear. They retreated to their local sanctuaries in the Median highlands and elsewhere on the plateau, preserving the sacred fires, maintaining the oral traditions, and quietly waiting for the return of Iranian political independence. During the Seleucid period, when Greek culture was aggressively promoted by the Macedonian colonists, the Magi maintained their identity as the guardians of the authentic Iranian religion, resisting the tide of Hellenization. The Parthian Empire, which arose in the late centuries BC and was itself deeply Iranian in character, patronized the Magi and the fire temples, recognizing the political utility of aligning the Arsacid dynasty with the ancient religious traditions of the plateau. The Magi, in turn, supported the Parthian kings and contributed to the gradual re-Iranization of the culture that characterized the Parthian period. The ultimate triumph of the Magian tradition came with the rise of the Sasanian dynasty in 224 AD, which made Zoroastrianism the official state religion of the empire, created a powerful, hierarchical church, and codified the Avesta, the sacred scriptures, under the supervision of the high priest Tansar. The Sasanian kings, who consciously modeled themselves on the Achaemenids, recognized the Magi as the essential custodians of the ancient faith, and the fire temples that they built across the empire were the magnificent, architectural fulfillment of the Median prototype at Tepe Nush-i, a lineage of sacred fire that had been kept burning, unbroken, for over 1,000 years. The military legacy of the Medes, which was so effectively absorbed and expanded by the Achaemenids, did not simply vanish with the fall of Persepolis and the Macedonian conquest. Rather, it continued to evolve and exert a powerful influence on the military doctrines of the successor states, particularly the Parthian and Sasanian empires, which faced the relentless military challenge of the Roman Republic and later, the Roman Empire. The Median innovation of the heavy, armored cavalry, the mounted warrior who combined the mobility of the horse with the shock power of the lance and the missile capability of the composite bow, was the direct ancestor of the cataphract, the most formidable and distinctive military unit of the Iranian plateau for nearly 1,000 years. The cataphract, whose name derives from the Greek kataphractos, meaning completely enclosed or armored, was a rider and horse encased in a full suit of scale or lamellar armor, charging with a long, two-handed lance, the contus, that could shatter any infantry formation in the ancient world. This type of soldier, which first appeared in the armies of the Medes and Persians, was developed and perfected by the Parthians, who used the cataphract in deadly combination with the light, mobile horse archer to achieve their most spectacular victories, including the annihilation of the Roman legions of Marcus Licinius Crassus at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC. The tactical doctrine that underpinned this victory, the coordinated use of heavy shock cavalry and light missile cavalry, was the direct evolutionary descendant of the combined arms reforms of Cyaxares, the great Median king who had first reorganized his army into specialized corps. The Battle of Carrhae, fought on the open, arid plains of northern Mesopotamia near the modern-day town of Haran, was a devastating demonstration of the superiority of the Iranian cavalry tradition, refined by the Medes and Persians, over the infantry-based legions of Rome. The Roman commander, Crassus, who was one of the wealthiest men in Rome and a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, led a massive invasion force of approximately 7 legions, totaling around 35,000 to 40,000 men, deep into Parthian territory, confident in the invincibility of the Roman heavy infantry. The Parthian general Cyrus, who commanded a much smaller but exquisitely trained and equipped force of approximately 10,000 men, consisting of 1,000 heavily armored cataphracts and 9,000 light horse archers, employed a tactic of relentless, mobile harassment that had its roots in the steppe warfare traditions that the Medes had absorbed and adapted. The Parthian horse archers, staying just out of range of the Roman infantry's short swords, poured a continuous, galling hail of arrows into the densely packed Roman formations, while the cataphracts waited for the opportune moment to charge. The Romans, unable to close with their elusive tormentors, were slowly and methodically slaughtered over the course of a single, horrific day. When Crassus's son Publius led a desperate cavalry countercharge, he was lured away from the main body and his force was completely annihilated by the cataphracts. The final assault by Cyrus's cataphracts shattered the exhausted and demoralized Roman lines, and Crassus himself was captured and executed, his severed head and hand sent to the Parthian king Orodes II as a trophy. The Battle of Carrhae was a Median-style victory, a triumph of cavalry mobility, missile power, and coordinated shock action, and it demonstrated to the Roman world that the Iranian military tradition, born in the highlands of Media, was a deadly and enduring force. The Sasanian Empire, which succeeded the Parthians in 224 AD, inherited and further institutionalized the cavalry-based military system that the Medes had pioneered, creating a formidable army that was the most dangerous and persistent rival of the later Roman and Byzantine empires for over 4 centuries. The Sasanian kings, particularly Shapuri, Khosrow I Anushirvan, and Khosrow II Perviz, organized a permanent, professional cavalry force, the Sovereign, which was composed of the Iranian aristocracy and was equipped and trained to the highest standards. The Sasanian cataphract, the ultimate expression of the Median Achaemenid Parthian cavalry tradition, was a near invulnerable human tank, protected by a full suit of chain mail or lamellar armor that covered both the rider and the horse, and armed with the long lance, the sword, and the mace. The Sasanian army, like its Median predecessor, was organized as a combined arms force, with the heavy cavalry supported by large contingents of infantry archers, war elephants, and a sophisticated corps of siege engineers that could reduce the most formidable Roman fortresses. The great Sasanian victories over the Roman Empire, such as the capture of the Emperor Valerian at the Battle of Edessa in 260 AD by Shapari, and the devastating campaigns of Khosrow II in the early 7th century that briefly restored the borders of the Achaemenid Empire, were triumphs of the Iranian military tradition that was fundamentally Median in its origins. The Romans, for their part, were forced to adapt, and the later Roman army, particularly the cavalry forces of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, was deeply influenced by the Iranian model, adopting the heavily armored cataphract and the mounted archer as essential components of their own military machine. The tactical principles that the Medes had introduced, the specialization of troops, the integration of missile and shock combat, the decisive use of cavalry on the flanks, and the importance of rapid mobility and strategic surprise, were not only preserved but were codified in the military manuals and strategic doctrines of the Sasanian period, which would later influence the armies of the Islamic Caliphate and, through them, the medieval world. The Sasanian Artesh-i-Iran, the army of Iran, was a meticulously organized institution, with a clear chain of command, a system of military grades and ranks, and a sophisticated logistical apparatus that could supply large armies on extended campaigns far from the imperial heartland. The royal armories, the Ganj, produced and stockpiled vast quantities of standardized weapons and armor, ensuring that the cavalry elite was consistently and superbly equipped. The principles of cavalry warfare, the importance of mounted archery and the devastating charge of the armored lancer, were passed on to the Arab conquerors who overran the Sasanian Empire in the 7th century AD, and these techniques were subsequently adopted and adapted by the Turkish and Mongol warrior peoples of Central Asia. The Mongol armies of Genghis Khan and his successors, with their unparalleled mastery of horse archery and their brilliant coordination of heavy and light cavalry, were, in a very real sense, the ultimate inheritors of a tactical tradition that could be traced back to the highlands of Media and the military genius of King Cyaxares. The Median military revolution, therefore, was not a brief episode but a permanent contribution to the global history of warfare, a set of tactical innovations that reshaped the battlefields of the ancient world and continued to echo across the centuries. The military architecture of the Median and Achaemenid periods, particularly the development of massive, strategically positioned fortresses to control the key passes and trade routes of the empire, also left a lasting physical and conceptual legacy on the defensive systems of the later Iranian empires. The Median practice of constructing enormous, stone and mud brick citadels on commanding heights, such as the fortress at Godin Tepe with its massive defensive walls and complex gate systems, was a direct response to the constant military pressures from Assyria and the Scythian nomads, and it established a model of strategic fortification that was replicated and expanded across the Iranian plateau. The Achaemenid kings maintained and strengthened these fortresses, and they constructed the famous Royal Road system, with its network of garrisons, supply stations, and defended caravanserais, which was essentially a linear extension of the Median practice of fortifying the lines of communication and trade. The Parthian and Sasanian empires, facing the continuous threat of Roman invasion from the west, constructed a series of massive, sophisticated defensive walls and fortress systems, including the famous Great Wall of Gorgan, a colossal brick fortification over 195 kilometers long that protected the Iranian heartland from steppe incursions, and the massive fortifications at Derbent on the Caspian Sea. These defensive works, some of the most impressive military architecture of the ancient world, were the direct descendants of the Median tradition of using fortifications to control strategic geography, a tradition that was born out of the existential struggle for survival against the Assyrian Empire, and which became a permanent feature of the Iranian military landscape. The transmission of Median administrative and political concepts through the Achaemenid and Sasanian periods into the structure of the early Islamic Caliphate is one of the most important, but least visible chapters in the long history of Near Eastern statecraft, a silent legacy of bureaucratic organization that profoundly shaped the governance of the medieval and modern worlds. The Arab conquest of the Sasanian Empire in the mid-7th century AD, which culminated in the decisive Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 AD and the fall of the imperial capital Ctesiphon, was a cataclysmic military and political event. But the conquering Arab armies, emerging from the tribal society of the Arabian Peninsula, had no developed tradition of centralized, bureaucratic imperial administration. The early caliphs, particularly Umar ibn al-Khattab, quickly recognized that the vast, complex, and wealthy territories they had conquered could not be effectively governed by the simple methods of tribal chieftainship and the distribution of plunder. They were faced with the necessity of managing a sophisticated, monetized economy, a complex system of land taxation, and a diverse, multi-ethnic population with deeply entrenched legal and administrative traditions. The solution, which was adopted with remarkable pragmatism, was to preserve and co-opt the existing Sasanian administrative apparatus, including its professional class of scribes and tax collectors, the Dabir, who were the direct heirs to the Achaemenid and ultimately, the Median and Elamite bureaucratic traditions. The Persian Diwan, the government bureau or ministry, was adopted wholesale by the Arab administration, and the Arabic term Diwan itself is a direct loanword from Middle Persian, encapsulating the profound administrative debt that the early Islamic state owed to its Sasanian predecessors. The role of the Persian-speaking, and historically Median-influenced, bureaucratic class in the Umayyad and especially the Abbasid caliphates was of absolutely central importance, and these scribes and administrators, known as the Kutub, were the indispensable technical experts who made the vast Islamic empire function. The Abbasid Caliphate, which overthrew the Umayyads in 750 AD and established its magnificent capital at Baghdad, deliberately situated on the Tigris River near the ruins of the Sasanian capital Ctesiphon, represented the apogee of Persian influence on Islamic civilization. The Abbasid court was consciously modeled on Sasanian precedents, with its elaborate protocol, its hierarchy of viziers, chamberlains, and officials, and its extensive patronage of scholarship, science, and literature. The Barmakid family, a powerful clan of Persian viziers who served the early Abbasid caliphs with legendary loyalty and skill, were the architects of a highly centralized, efficient, and Persian-style bureaucratic state, with a network of provincial departments, a sophisticated postal and intelligence service, the Barid, and a comprehensive system of land taxation and revenue collection that was directly based on the Sasanian models. The administrative terminology, the methods of accounting, the use of seals and official registers, and the very concept of a professional, non-hereditary civil service were all inherited from the Sasanian and, through them, the Achaemenid and Median traditions. The shadow of the Medes, in this sense, falls directly on the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, the glittering court of Harun al-Rashid, and the administrative machinery that made the vast, cosmopolitan empire of Baghdad possible. The continuity of these administrative traditions was not merely a matter of abstract institutions. It was embodied in the specific families and lineages of Persian scribes who served successive empires for centuries, preserving and transmitting the arcane technical knowledge of governance across dynastic ruptures and cultural transformations. These families, often based in the old urban centers of Iraq and western Iran, including the ancient Median and Elamite heartlands of the Zagros, maintained their professional identity and their specialized skills through the Achaemenid, Seleucid, Parthian, Sasanian, and early Islamic periods, adapting to new languages and new political masters but always retaining their essential function as the literate administrators of the state. The transition from Pahlavi, the Middle Persian language of the Sasanian administration, to Arabic as the official language of the Caliphate was a gradual process that took several generations, and during this transitional period, the Persian Dabir and Kutub were the essential mediators who translated the complex administrative and fiscal terminology of the old empire into the new imperial language. The Arabic administrative vocabulary, particularly in the fields of taxation, land registration, and government accounting, is filled with Persian loanwords that were adopted during this period of bureaucratic synthesis, linguistic fossils that trace the transmission of the entire system of Sasanian statecraft into the Islamic world. The very structure of the Islamic land tax, the carriage, and the poll tax on non-Muslims, the jizya, were direct continuations of the Sasanian taxation system, administered by the same families of officials using the same methods of cadastral survey and assessment that had been developed over centuries. The influence of the Median and Persian administrative heritage extended far beyond the realm of taxation and finance into the very conception of the state and the role of the ruler, shaping the political philosophy and the ideals of governance that were articulated by the great thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age. The concept of the circle of justice, a political maxim that states that the ruler's power depends on the army depends on the treasury depends on the prosperity of the peasantry, and the prosperity of the peasantry depends on the justice of the ruler, was a foundational principle of Sasanian and, ultimately, Achaemenid and Median statecraft. This idea, which was articulated in the Sasanian period and transmitted to the Islamic world through the Persian administrative class, became a central theme of the Mirrors for Princes literature, a genre of political advice that flourished in the Abbasid period and profoundly influenced the political thought of the medieval Islamic world. The ideal of the just, remote, and all-powerful monarch, who rules through a professional bureaucracy and maintains the balance of the social order, which is a recurring theme in the great works of Islamic political philosophy, from al-Farabi to Nizam al-Mulk, is a direct descendant of the Median and Persian model of kingship. The shadow of the Medes, the creators of the first Iranian Empire and the pioneers of a new kind of tributary state, thus extends into the very heart of Islamic political theory and practice, a testament to the enduring power of their administrative and ideological innovations to shape the structures of governance for over a millennium after the fall of Ecbatana. The tangible, material evidence for this long chain of administrative transmission can be found in the papyri, parchment, and paper documents that have survived from the early Islamic period, which revealed the direct continuities of practice from the Sasanian and earlier eras. The use of official seals, impressed into clay or wax, to authenticate documents, a practice that was universal in the Achaemenid administration and which had its roots in the Elamite and Median sealing traditions, continued in the early Islamic Diwan. The format of official registers, with their carefully ruled columns and their standardized entries for tax assessments and receipts, was a direct imitation of the Sasanian administrative papyri. The complex system of weights and measures, the standardized silver dirham and gold dinar coinage of the caliphate, and the very concept of a state monopoly on the minting of precious metal currency were all inherited from the Sasanian economic system. The archaeological discoveries of early Islamic administrative sites, such as the vast treasury at the Abbasid capital of Samarra, have yielded seals, receipts, and fragments of registers that are virtually indistinguishable in their administrative logic and their technical execution from the Sasanian and Achaemenid prototypes. The administrative brain of the medieval Islamic Empire, therefore, was a Persian brain, and that brain had been shaped, over the course of many centuries, by the experiences and innovations of the Medes, the people who had first learned the arts of imperial governance in the crucible of their struggle with the Assyrian Empire and who had passed that precious knowledge down through the ages. The archaeological rediscovery of the Medes is a story of painstaking detective work, serendipitous discovery, and the gradual, often contested, assembly of a coherent picture of a civilization that had been all but erased from the physical landscape by the ravages of time and the monumental building projects of their Achaemenid successors. Unlike the Assyrians, who left behind vast, stone-paved palace complexes filled with meticulously carved alabaster reliefs and libraries of cuneiform tablets, or the Achaemenid Persians, who constructed the magnificent, stone terrace ceremonial capital of Persepolis, the Medes built primarily with mud brick on stone foundations, a building material that, when exposed to the elements and left unmaintained, rapidly decays into a formless mound of earth. The ancient capital of Ecbatana, the legendary city of the 7 concentric walls described by Herodotus, lies deeply buried beneath the modern, bustling city of Hamadan, making large-scale, systematic excavation a virtual impossibility, and leaving the most important Median urban center tantalizingly out of reach. The Assyrian annals, which had provided the primary historical source for the existence of the Medes, had described them as a formidable enemy, but the material evidence for their culture remained stubbornly elusive, leading some early 20th century scholars to question whether the Median Empire was anything more than a Greek historical fiction, a phantom conjured by Herodotus to fill the gap between the fall of Assyria and the rise of Persia. It was only through the dedicated and meticulous excavation of remote, highland sites like Tepe Nush-i Jan, Godin Tepe, and Baba Jan, far from the overbuilt urban centers, that the archaeological reality of the Medes was finally, and dramatically, confirmed. The excavation of Tepe Nush-i Jan, conducted by the British archaeologist David Stronach between 1967 and 1977, was the single most important breakthrough in Median archaeology, a perfectly preserved, single-period site that provided an unmediated and uncontaminated glimpse into the religious and political architecture of the Medes. The site, located on a stark, rocky outcrop in the desolate highlands near Malayr, was not a sprawling city but a compact, purpose-built religious and administrative compound, consisting of a central fire temple, a columned audience hall, a storage fortress, and a series of mysterious underground tunnels. The extraordinary preservation of the mud brick walls, which in some places still stood to a height of over 8 meters, was due to the deliberate and careful infilling of the entire complex by the Medes themselves at the time of its abandonment, an act of ritual decommissioning that sealed the structures and protected them from erosion and collapse for over 2,500 years. The fire temple, with its cruciform plan, its blind windows, and its central altar chamber, was a revelation, providing the earliest and most intact example of a distinctively Iranian religious architectural form that was utterly different from the Mesopotamian temple tradition. The absence of any significant Assyrian cultural material, such as the typical glazed bricks or cuneiform inscriptions, and the presence of a purely local ceramic tradition and a hoard of silver ingots, confirmed that Tepe Nush-i Jan was a wholly Median creation, a testament to a sophisticated and independent highland civilization that had developed its own unique architectural, religious, and economic identity in the crucible of the Assyrian period. The excavation of Godin Tepe, a large multi-period mound in the fertile Kangavar Valley, provided the complementary evidence for the political and military architecture of the Medes, revealing the transition from a small fortified manor to a major regional administrative center. The Level 2 occupation at Godin Tepe, which dates to the 7th century BC, consisted of a massive citadel with towering defensive walls, projecting towers, and a complex, well-defended gate system, all clearly built to withstand a determined siege, a direct architectural response to the constant military threat posed by the Assyrian and Scythian incursions. Inside the citadel, the excavators uncovered a large, columned hall, one of the earliest known examples of this quintessentially Iranian architectural form, which would later be elevated to monumental grandeur in the Ecbatana at Persepolis. The hall, with its rows of wooden columns supporting a flat roof, was clearly an audience chamber, or a reception room for a powerful local ruler or governor, a physical manifestation of the centralized political authority that was consolidating in the Median highlands. The presence of administrative tablets, storage rooms filled with large jars for wine and oil, and evidence of craft production within the citadel walls indicated a complex, centrally managed economy, a state apparatus that was capable of collecting, storing, and redistributing agricultural surplus. The violent destruction of the Level 2 citadel by fire, and its subsequent partial abandonment, provided archaeological evidence for the period of chaos and conflict that accompanied the Scythian invasions and the final, tumultuous struggles with the remnants of the Assyrian Empire, events that are described in the Greek literary tradition and the Babylonian chronicles. The cumulative evidence from these and other, smaller excavations, such as at Baba Jan and the site of the Median rock-cut tombs at Kizkapan in Iraqi Kurdistan, has allowed archaeologists and historians to reconstruct a coherent, albeit still incomplete, picture of the Median material culture and settlement patterns. The distinctive Median ceramic tradition, a fine, buff-colored pottery that is often decorated with simple painted designs, has been identified at sites across the western Iranian plateau, providing a material marker for the extent of Median cultural influence or political control. The rock-cut tombs, with their carved facades that feature images of standing figures and fire altars, provide direct visual evidence of the Median religious and funerary practices and demonstrate a connection to the later Achaemenid royal tomb tradition at Nush-i Rostam. The silver ingots from Tepe Nush-i Jan, stamped with official marks, provide evidence of a standardized economic system and the control of the lucrative east-west trade routes that pass through Median territory. The overall picture that emerges from this painstaking archaeological work is of a powerful, innovative, and sophisticated civilization that was the equal of any of its contemporaries, a civilization that forged its own distinctive religious and political institutions in the harsh environment of the Zagros highlands, and which laid the essential material and cultural foundations for the great Persian Empire that would follow. The shadow of the Medes, which had been so faint as to be almost invisible, was finally being illuminated by the spade of the archaeologist. The ongoing nature of archaeological research in Iran and the surrounding regions means that our understanding of the Medes continues to evolve, with each new excavation season and each new discovery adding fresh nuances and complexities to the picture. The application of modern, non-invasive survey techniques, such as satellite imagery analysis and ground-penetrating radar, is gradually mapping the buried extent of the Median settlement at Ecbatana beneath the streets of modern Hamadan, offering the tantalizing prospect of future discoveries that could finally reveal the legendary capital in its full, physical dimension. The careful reanalysis of the Assyrian administrative texts, using the latest advances in cuneiform studies, continues to extract new details about the names, locations, and political relationships of the Median chieftains who appear in the royal correspondence. The study of the Persepolis administrative tablets, written in Elamite, is yielding new insights into the role of the Medes in the Achaemenid economic and military system, confirming the picture of a deeply integrated, binational elite. The story of the Medes, as revealed by the archaeological record, is not a static, finished narrative but a living, evolving field of historical inquiry, a testament to the enduring power of material culture to speak across the millennia and to restore to memory a people who had been unjustly forgotten. The Medes, the great antagonists of Assyria and the founders of the First Iranian Empire, are finally, piece by painstaking piece, emerging from the deep shadow of history into the light of modern understanding. The deep and intertwined ethnic and cultural relationship between the Medes and the Persians, which was the fundamental political reality underlying the Achaemenid Empire, has been a subject of perennial fascination and occasional confusion, both in the ancient sources and in modern scholarship. Both peoples were branches of the larger Iranian-speaking family, part of the great migration of indo-European speaking peoples who had moved southward from the Eurasian steppes into the Iranian plateau during the late 2nd and early 1st millennia BC. Their languages, Median and Old Persian, were closely related, mutually intelligible dialects of the southwestern branch of the Iranian language family, and their religious, social, and material cultures, while exhibiting distinct regional characteristics, shared a common ancestral heritage. The Greek writers, who were often vague about the internal distinctions among the various Iranian peoples they encountered, frequently used the terms Mede and Persian interchangeably, a confusion that, while sometimes inaccurate, reflects the genuine cultural proximity and the deep integration of the two groups within the Achaemenid court and military. The Persians, who had migrated further south into the region of Fars, the ancient Elamite highland territory of Anshan, were, by the 7th century BC, a smaller and less politically developed group than the Medes, who had consolidated their power in the more strategically exposed northwestern plateau under the direct pressure of Assyrian imperialism. The Median overlordship over the Persians, which was established by Phraortes in the mid-7th century BC, was not a foreign conquest of an alien people but the establishment of a feudal hierarchy between two closely related Iranian groups, a relationship that was cemented by dynastic marriages and by the shared experience of serving in the Median military. The process of Persian state formation and cultural development under Median suzerainty was a period of intensive apprenticeship, during which the Persian elite absorbed the political, military, and cultural lessons of their more powerful northern kin. The Persian vassal kings, the ancestors of Cyrus the Great who ruled the small kingdom of Anshan from their capital at Pasargadae, were thoroughly Medianized in their courtly culture, their military organization, and their political aspirations. They served as loyal vassals and military commanders in the Median army, fighting alongside the Medes in the great wars against Assyria and Lydia, and they were intimately familiar with the administrative and diplomatic practices of the Median court at Ecbatana. The marriage of Cambyses I, the Persian king, to Mandane, the daughter of the Median king Astyages, was the ultimate expression of this close dynastic and political integration, a union that produced Cyrus the Great, a prince who was half Median by blood and who was raised in the traditions of both royal houses. When Cyrus led his revolt against Astyages, he was not an alien outsider overthrowing a foreign oppressor. He was a member of the extended Median royal family, a disaffected vassal who exploited the internal political divisions of the Median court to assert his own claim to the imperial throne. The successful transfer of power, and the remarkably smooth integration of the Median elite into the new Persian order, was only possible because the two groups were already so closely intertwined that the transition could be represented not as a conquest but as a change of dynasty within a single, unified imperial elite. The deliberate policy of Cyrus the Great to present himself as the legitimate successor to the Median throne, rather than its destroyer, is evident in every aspect of his conduct and in the propaganda that he and his successors disseminated. By sparing the life of Astyages and treating him with honor, Cyrus was following a Median and Iranian tradition of respecting a defeated, royal adversary, a stark contrast to the Assyrian practice of brutal execution and public humiliation. By retaining Ecbatana as the summer capital and maintaining the Median nobility in their positions of power and prestige, Cyrus was signaling that his rule was a continuation of the Iranian imperial tradition, not a rupture. The very title that Cyrus and his successors adopted, the Shahanshah, the King of Kings, was a Median political concept that asserted a form of universal, supranational kingship that was distinct from the more territorially limited kingship of the older Mesopotamian traditions. The Achaemenid Empire, as it expanded under Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius, was a Perso-Median enterprise, a partnership in which the two Iranian peoples, along with other subject nations, pooled their resources and their talents to create a world empire. The Medes, who had first forged the Iranian imperial model in the crucible of the Assyrian wars, provided the essential political, military, and cultural framework, while the Persians, with their genius for administration and their access to the sophisticated Elamite bureaucratic tradition, provided the organizational capacity to manage an empire of unprecedented scale. The synthesis of these two Iranian traditions, the Median and the Persian, was the secret of the Achaemenid success. The long-term consequences of this Perso-Median synthesis for the subsequent history of Iran were profound and enduring. The term, Mede, continued to be used, in certain contexts, to refer to the Iranian peoples in general, and the memory of the Median Empire was preserved, in mythologized form, in the Iranian national epic tradition, the Shahnameh of Phraortes, which recounts the deeds of the Cyaxares kings, a legendary dynasty that blends the historical memories of the Achaemenids and the Medes with the heroes of the Avesta. The Sasanian dynasty, which rose to power in the 3rd century AD, consciously modeled itself on the Achaemenids and, through them, on the Cyaxares kings, and the Sasanian royal ideology was deeply infused with the memory of the ancient, pre-Hellenistic Iranian empires. The Magi, who had been the Median priestly tribe, remained the custodians of the Zoroastrian religious tradition throughout the Sasanian period and beyond, preserving the sacred fire and the sacred texts through the tumult of the Arab conquest and the Islamic period. The modern Zoroastrian community, the Parsis of India and Iran, still maintain the religious traditions that were shaped, in their formative period, by the Median Magi in the fire temples of the Zagros highlands. The shadow of the Medes, therefore, is not merely a feature of the ancient past, it is a living presence in the cultural, religious, and national identity of the Iranian peoples to the present day, a deep and enduring stratum of the collective memory that connects the modern nation of Iran to its ancient, pre-Persian origins. The story of the Medes is a powerful corrective to the oversimplified narrative that often portrays the Persian Empire as a sudden, miraculous, and unprecedented eruption onto the stage of world history. In reality, The Persian Empire was the brilliant, culminating synthesis of a long and complex process of state formation on the Iranian plateau, a process that had been underway for over a millennium before Cyrus the Great. The Medes were the crucial link in that chain, the innovators who transformed the scattered Iranian tribes into a unified, imperial nation, the destroyers of the old Assyrian order, and the architects of the military and political institutions that the Persians would inherit and perfect. To study the Medes is to uncover the deep, hidden roots of the Persian Empire, to recognize that the glory of Cyrus and Darius was not a spontaneous creation but the magnificent flowering of a tree that had been planted, nurtured, and grown to maturity in the harsh, windswept highlands of Media. The first Iranian empire was not the Achaemenid, it was the Median, and its shadow, far from being a sign of obscurity, is the very substance of the Persian achievement, the dark, fertile, and essential soil from which the golden age of ancient Iran arose. The fall of the Median dynasty and the rise of the Achaemenid Empire did not, as the Greek narrative sometimes implies, signal the immediate and total eclipse of the Medes from the political stage. Rather, it marked their transformation from the ruling senior partner to the nearly co-equal junior partner in a broader Iranian imperial project, a status that, while creating underlying tensions, ensured their continued prominence and prosperity for generations. The Median nobility, which had been the backbone of the imperial army and administration under Cyaxares and Astyages, was, with very few exceptions, seamlessly integrated into the new Achaemenid elite, their vast estates in the Zagros and across the plateau confirmed, their military commands retained, and their privileged access to the royal court preserved. The Median satrapy, which encompassed the core of their ancient homeland, was consistently one of the most honored and prestigious provinces, and its annual tribute of 450 silver talents, along with the provision of the magnificent Nicaean horses, reflected its immense economic and strategic importance. The Median contingent in the Achaemenid army, the cavalry in particular, remained a vital component of the imperial military machine, and Medes fought in all the major campaigns of the empire, from the Greek wars of Darius and Xerxes to the endless frontier skirmishes in Central Asia and the Indus Valley. The visual evidence from Persepolis, where the Medes are depicted as the intimate equals of the Persians, confirms that, at the level of the imperial court, the Medo-Persian partnership was a lived and celebrated reality, a foundational myth of the state that was continuously reinforced through art, ceremony, and ritual. However, the relationship was not always without friction, and the surviving sources contain hints of underlying Median resentment and occasional outbreaks of rebellion that revealed the limits of the imperial synthesis. The Behistun inscription of Darius the Great, which records in excruciating detail the rebellions that convulsed the empire in the chaotic year of 522–521 BC following the death of Cambyses II, mentions a Median rebel named Phraortes, who claimed to be a descendant of the great king Cyaxares and who raised a serious insurrection in the Median heartland. This Phraortes, according to the Behistun text, was captured by Darius's generals after a series of battles and was brought to Ecbatana, where he was subjected to the gruesome punishment of having his nose, ears, and tongue cut off, and was then impaled, a brutal treatment that Darius himself boasts of in his inscription. The very existence of this rebellion, and the specific claim of the rebel to the ancient Median royal lineage, demonstrates that the memory of the independent Median kingdom and the prestige of the dynasty of Deioces and Cyaxares were still potent political forces, capable of mobilizing significant opposition to the Achaemenid central authority even 60 years after the fall of Astyages. The brutal suppression of the revolt, and the need for such a display of terror, indicates the seriousness of the threat and the underlying, persistent sense of Median identity that was not entirely subsumed into the Achaemenid imperial framework. The later history of the Achaemenid period contains further, more muted, evidence of ongoing Median political consciousness and occasional resistance. The Greek writers, particularly Ctesias and Xenophon, relate stories of Median nobles who wielded immense power at court and who were often involved in the intricate and murderous palace intrigues that characterized the Achaemenid succession. The story of the younger Cyrus, the Persian prince who, in 401 BC, raised a massive army, including the famous 10,000 Greek mercenaries, to challenge his brother Artaxerxes II for the throne, involved a complex network of alliances with disaffected satraps and nobles, some of whom may have been motivated by a lingering sense of Median identity. The satrapal revolts that plagued the empire in the 4th century BC, as recorded by the Greek historians, often originated in the western and northern provinces, including the regions of the old Median and Lydian territories, and these revolts were sometimes led by ambitious satraps who leveraged local ethnic loyalties. The Achaemenid Empire, for all its magnificent integration of the Medes and Persians, was a diverse and often fractious multinational state, and the particular sense of Median identity, rooted in their glorious imperial past and their distinct territorial base, remained a latent political factor. A potential source of instability that could be activated by a charismatic leader claiming the legacy of Cyaxares. The empire's stability depended, in part, on the continued success of the central government in managing this Median identity, rewarding their loyalty, and suppressing, with terrifying brutality when necessary, any resurgence of separatist sentiment. The conquest of the Achaemenid Empire by Alexander the Great in 330 BC, and the subsequent fragmentation of his empire among his squabbling Macedonian generals, created a new political environment in which the old Median identity and territorial structures underwent further transformation. The Seleucid Empire, which ruled the Iranian plateau for much of the 3rd century BC, adopted a policy of aggressive Hellenization, founding Greek-style cities and colonies throughout the former Median and Persian territories, including a large military colony at Ecbatana, which they renamed Epiphania. The Median nobility, like the Persian, was confronted with a new ruling elite that spoke a different language, worshipped different gods, and had a different culture. Some Medes, particularly those of the upper class, were undoubtedly Hellenized, learning Greek, adopting Greek customs, and participating in the new colonial administration. However, the Greek colonial presence was always thin on the ground in the vast, rugged highlands of Media, and the bulk of the Median population, particularly the rural villagers and the mountain pastoralists, likely maintained their traditional Iranian language, religion, and way of life, looking to the Magi for spiritual and cultural leadership. The region of Media Atropatene, the modern-day Azerbaijan, was established by a Persian satrap, Atropates, who successfully resisted Seleucid control and founded an independent kingdom that was a direct continuation of the Achaemenid and Median administrative and cultural tradition. A kingdom that would persist as a vassal state of the Parthians for centuries, and that preserved the memory of the ancient Median legacy in its very name. The rise of the Parthian Arsacid dynasty, which was itself an Iranian people from the steppes of Central Asia, marked a significant turning point for the Medes. The Parthians, who overthrew the Seleucid rule and established a loose, feudal empire that encompassed the entire Iranian plateau, were more culturally akin to the Medes and Persians than the Greeks, and their rule was characterized by a revival of Iranian traditions and a patronage of the Zoroastrian religion. The Parthian king Mithridates I, who conquered Media in the mid-2nd century BC, incorporated the Median territories into his empire and treated the local nobility with respect, recognizing their ancient prestige and their military value. The Medes, under Parthian rule, regained much of their traditional prominence, and the Median cavalry once again became a key component of the Iranian army. The Parthian Empire, with its decentralized, feudal structure, was in many ways a return to the pre-Achaemenid Median model of a multi-ethnic, tribute-based imperial confederation, and the Medes must have found the Parthian system more congenial than the centralized, bureaucratic Achaemenid state, or the alien Hellenistic monarchy. The shadow of the Medes, in the Parthian period, was no longer a source of latent rebellion but a respected and integral part of the revived Iranian imperial fabric, a legacy that was honored and perpetuated by the new Arsacid overlords who proudly claimed the title of Shahanshah, the King of Kings, the very title that had been coined by the Median kings of Ecbatana. The transition from the Parthian to the Sasanian Empire in the early 3rd century AD represented the final and most glorious re-emergence of the Median and Achaemenid legacy, a period when the memory of the ancient Iranian empires was deliberately and systematically revived as the ideological foundation of a new, centralized, and fiercely nationalistic state. The Sasanian dynasty, which originated in the province of Fars, the ancient Persian heartland, was founded by Artaxerxes I, a descendant of the priestly line of Sazan, who overthrew the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, in 224 AD and was crowned Shahanshah in Ctesiphon. Ardashir and his son, Shapurai, were driven by a powerful and explicit ideology of imperial restoration, presenting themselves as the avengers of the Achaemenid kings and the legitimate heirs of the glorious pre-Hellenistic Iranian past. In their rock-cut reliefs at Nush-i Rostam, carved directly beneath the tombs of the Achaemenid kings Darius I and Xerxes, the Sasanian monarchs depicted themselves receiving the divine investiture of kingship from the god Ahura Mazda, in a visual and iconographic program that was an unmistakable and deliberate evocation of the Achaemenid tradition. This was not a vague, generic claim to Iranian kingship. It was a specific, historically aware, and archaeologically informed act of cultural reclamation, a declaration to the world that the ancient glory of the Medes and Persians had been restored after the long night of Hellenistic and Parthian foreign rule. The role of the Medes and their ancient heritage in the Sasanian imperial ideology was profound, even though the Sasanian dynasty itself was Persian. The Sasanian state created an official, codified Zoroastrian church, with a powerful, hierarchical priesthood, the Magi, who were the direct descendants of the Median priestly tribe. The Magi, under the leadership of the high priest Tansar, were instrumental in compiling the Avesta, the Zoroastrian scriptures, and in defining the orthodoxy of the state religion. The fire temple, the architectural form that had been pioneered by the Medes at Tepe Nush-i Jan, was elevated to the status of the central institution of the state religion, and magnificent, domed fire temples were constructed across the empire, funded by royal and noble patronage. The three most sacred fires of the Sasanian Empire, the Adur Farnbag, the Adur Gushnasp, and the Adur Berzanmir, were associated with the three traditional estates of Iranian society, the priests, the warriors, and the farmers, and were tended by the Magi in perpetuity. The sacred fire of Adur Gushnasp, at the magnificent site of Takhti Soliman in the Median highlands, became the particular fire of the kings, and all Sasanian monarchs made a pilgrimage there on foot after their coronation, a ritual that directly connected the new king to the ancient Median and Persian tradition of fire veneration. The religious culture of the Sasanian Empire, which was the most powerful and enduring expression of Iranian identity in late antiquity, was, in its most essential elements, a Median creation, perfected, institutionalized, and propagated by the Magian priesthood. The military organization of the Sasanian Empire, which was the most formidable rival of the Roman and Byzantine empires for over 4 centuries, also bore the unmistakable stamp of the Median and Achaemenid heritage. The elite Sasanian cavalry, the Sovereign, were the direct heirs of the Median heavy cavalry tradition, encased in full suits of chain mail or lamellar armor, charging with the long lance and wielding the heavy mace and sword. The Sasanian military manuals, which have been partially preserved in later Arabic translations, codified the principles of cavalry warfare that had been first formulated by the Medes and refined by the Achaemenids and Parthians: the importance of maneuver, the decisive charge of the armored lancer, the coordinated use of horse archers, and the maintenance of a strategic reserve. The Sasanian army, like its Median and Achaemenid predecessors, was a multi-ethnic force, drawing contingents from the various subject peoples of the empire. But its core was the Iranian heavy cavalry, drawn from the noble families of the plateau, many of whom could trace their ancestry back to the Median and Persian aristocratic clans of the Achaemenid period. The great Sasanian victories over the Romans, such as the capture of the Emperor Valerian at Edessa in 260 AD, were triumphs of this ancient Iranian military tradition, a tradition that had been born on the battlefields of the Assyrian wars and had been continuously developed and perfected for nearly 1,000 years. The administrative structures of the Sasanian Empire, which created a highly centralized and efficient state apparatus, were a direct continuation of the Achaemenid model, which had itself been built upon the Median foundation of a tributary, multi-ethnic empire governed through a system of provinces and a professional scribal class. The Sasanian Diwan, the government chancellery, was staffed by the Dabir, the professional scribes and administrators who were the direct successors of the Achaemenid and Parthian bureaucratic traditions. The Sasanian system of taxation, based on a comprehensive cadastral survey of agricultural land, was a refinement of the Achaemenid tribute system, and it provided the financial resources that sustained the magnificent court, the powerful army, and the massive infrastructure projects of the empire. The Sasanian legal system, which was based on Zoroastrian religious law and the decrees of the king, was administered by a professional judiciary and was recorded in a series of legal codes that were the first systematic codification of Iranian law. The entire apparatus of the Sasanian state was a monument to the Iranian tradition of imperial governance, a tradition that had been forged in the crucible of the Median Empire and had been successively refined by the Achaemenids, the Parthians, and the Sasanians themselves over the course of more than a millennium. The Medes, who had been the first to conceive of a unified Iranian state that could challenge and surpass the empires of Mesopotamia, were the true founders of this enduring political and administrative tradition. The cultural memory of the Medes within the Sasanian Empire was preserved not only in these institutional continuities but also in the oral and written traditions of the Iranian national history, which were eventually compiled in the great epic poem, the Shahnameh of Phraortes, in the 10th century AD. The Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, is the national epic of Iran, and it recounts the history of the Iranian people from the mythical creation of the world down to the Arab conquest. The poem is based on the Sasanian historical tradition, the Quad-e-Namik, the Book of Lords, which was the official court chronicle of the Sasanian kings. In the Shahnameh, the Cyaxares dynasty, which corresponds to the Achaemenids and Medes of historical reality, is portrayed as the golden age of Iranian kingship, a time of heroic warriors, wise rulers, and the great prophet Zoroaster. While the specific memory of the Medes as a distinct political entity had faded, their glory was merged with that of the Achaemenids into the single, glorious Cyaxares tradition, a mythologized but profoundly influential version of the past that shaped the Iranian national consciousness for 1,000 years. The shadow of the Medes, in the Shahnameh, is thus absorbed into the brilliant light of the Cyaxares kings, their deeds and their achievements remembered in the legendary figures of Kai Khosrow and the other heroes of the Iranian Golden Age. The independent Median Empire was gone, but its spirit, its military valor, and its political genius lived on in the immortal verses of the Persian national epic. The Arab conquest of the Sasanian Empire in the 7th century AD and the subsequent spread of Islam across the Iranian plateau represent a profound rupture in the political and religious history of the region, but the deep-seated traditions of Median and Persian statecraft, learning, and culture were not extinguished. Rather, they were transformed and transmitted into the new Islamic civilization, where they would undergo a remarkable renaissance and exert a powerful influence on the medieval and modern worlds. The initial period of the Arab conquest was, by all accounts, a time of immense upheaval, destruction, and demographic change, as the Arab armies swept through the crumbling Sasanian defenses, sacking cities, destroying fire temples, and imposing a new political and religious order. The Sasanian imperial administration, the Diwan, was initially disrupted, but the conquering Arab rulers, faced with the necessity of governing a vast and complex territory, quickly recognized the indispensability of the Persian bureaucratic class. The Umayyad Caliphate, which ruled the Islamic world from Damascus, gradually adopted the Persian administrative system, retaining the Persian Dabir as tax collectors, accountants, and scribes, and incorporating many of the practices and procedures of the Sasanian Diwan into the new Islamic administration. The Arabic language, which became the official language of the state, was enriched by a vast influx of Persian administrative and technical vocabulary, and the very concept of a professional, centralized bureaucracy, a hallmark of the Sasanian and earlier Iranian empires, was adopted and perpetuated by the Islamic State. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 AD, which overthrew the Umayyads and established a new caliphal dynasty based in Iraq, marked the decisive moment of the Persian cultural and administrative renaissance within the Islamic world. The Abbasid caliphs, who came to power with the crucial support of Persian converts to Islam and disaffected Iranian elements in the eastern provinces, deliberately modeled their court and their government on the Sasanian prototype. The founding of the magnificent capital at Baghdad in 762 AD, a perfectly circular, planned city on the Tigris River near the ruins of the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon, was a symbolic and practical act of imperial renewal, a statement that the new Islamic empire was the legitimate successor to the ancient Iranian empires. The Abbasid court, with its elaborate ceremonial, its hierarchy of viziers, chamberlains, and officials, and its immense patronage of scholarship and the arts, was a direct imitation of the Sasanian royal court. The Barmakid family, a clan of Persian origin from Balkh, served as viziers to the early Abbasid caliphs and were the architects of a highly centralized and efficient administrative state, based on the Sasanian model, that systematized taxation, improved the postal and intelligence service, and patronized a massive translation movement that brought Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge into the Arabic language. The golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, the age of Harun al-Rashid and al-Mamun, the age of the 1001 Nights, was, in its most fundamental institutional and cultural structures, a Persian golden age, built upon the deep foundations of the Sasanian, Achaemenid, and Median empires. The intellectual and scientific achievements of the Islamic Golden Age, which were among the most brilliant and consequential in human history, were made possible by the preservation and translation of the accumulated knowledge of the ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean civilizations, and the Persian scholarly tradition, rooted in the Achaemenid and Sasanian academies, played a central and indispensable role in this process. The great translation movement that flourished in Baghdad in the 8th and 9th centuries, which rendered the works of Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, the medical texts of Galen and Hippocrates, and the mathematical and astronomical works of Ptolemy and Euclid into Arabic, was heavily staffed by Persian scholars and funded by Persian viziers. The Academy of Gondishaper, in the ancient Elamite and Median region of Khuzestan, which had been the greatest center of learning in the Sasanian Empire, was a direct model for the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and many of the Nestorian Christian and Zoroastrian scholars who had taught at Gondishaper were brought to the Abbasid capital to participate in the intellectual ferment. The Persian contribution to the development of Islamic medicine, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, and philosophy was immense, and the names of Persian scholars like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, al-Razi, Rhazes, al-Biruni, and al-Khwarizmi, from whose name the word algorithm is derived, are among the most illustrious in the history of world science. These scholars, writing in Arabic but drawing on their deep Persian cultural and intellectual heritage, were the direct heirs to the tradition of learning that had been cultivated at the Sasanian court of Khosrow Anushirvan and through him, to the Achaemenid and Median appreciation for the collection and synthesis of knowledge from across the empire. The transmission of Persian literary and artistic traditions into the Islamic world was equally profound, and the distinctive forms and themes of Persian poetry, architecture, and decorative arts, which had evolved over centuries on the Iranian plateau, became integral components of the broader Islamic civilization. The Persian language, which had been submerged as an official administrative tongue under the Umayyads, re-emerged in the Abbasid period and later as a major literary language, and the great poets of the medieval Persian tradition, Ferdowsi, Rumi, Sa'di, Hafez, produced a body of work that is among the supreme achievements of world literature. The epic poetry of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, as we have seen, preserved and mythologized the memory of the pre-Islamic Iranian empires, including the Medes, and it instilled a powerful sense of Iranian national identity that survived centuries of foreign rule. The architectural forms of the Persian mosque, the magnificent madrasa, and the royal palace, with their distinctive blue-glazed tiles, their soaring, vaulted iwans, and their serene, geometrically arranged gardens, were the direct descendants of the Achaemenid and Sasanian architectural traditions, and they were disseminated across the Islamic world from Spain to India, influencing the built environment of a vast and diverse civilization. The miniature painting of the Persian courts, the intricate weaving of Persian carpets, and the refinement of Persian metalwork and ceramics all represent the continuous evolution of aesthetic traditions that had their roots in the material culture of the Median and Achaemenid periods. The shadow of the Medes, in this broadest cultural sense, is visible in the entire magnificent edifice of medieval Persian and Islamic civilization, a testament to the enduring power of the First Iranian Empire's cultural legacy. The ultimate fate of the Medes as a distinct, identifiable ethnic group is one of gradual absorption and synthesis into the broader Iranian and later, the Islamic world, a process that began with their integration into the Achaemenid Empire and was completed over the course of the following millennium. The Median language, which had been closely related to Old Persian, gradually faded from use, replaced by Middle Persian, Pahlavi, in the Sasanian period and eventually, by the modern Persian language Farsi, which is the direct descendant of the language of the Sasanian court. The distinct Median identity, which had been a powerful political force in the Achaemenid period, slowly dissolved as the Medes, Persians, and other Iranian peoples intermarried and shared a common imperial culture. The region of Media, the ancient heartland of the Zagros highlands, retained its name, the Greek and Latin. Media, the Arabic. Al-Jibal, the modern Iranian province of Hamadan. But its inhabitants became simply Iranians, the people of the land of Iran. The memory of the Medes, however, their name, and their legendary role as the first great Iranian imperial power, was never entirely forgotten. It was preserved in the Bible, in the Greek and Roman historians, and in mythologized form, in the Persian national epic. The Medes, the great destroyers of Assyria and the founders of the First Iranian Empire, had fulfilled their historical role and had passed the torch to their Persian successors, but their shadow, that deep and formative influence on the political, military, religious, and cultural traditions of ancient Iran, remains a permanent and essential part of the story of human civilization. The study of the Medes presents a profound and enduring historiographical challenge, a detective story that spans over 2.5 millennia and involves the critical interpretation of a complex, often contradictory, body of evidence drawn from Assyrian cuneiform tablets, Babylonian chronicles, Greek and Roman literary texts, the Persian epic tradition, and the fragmentary, painstakingly recovered archaeological record. The fundamental problem is that the Medes themselves, unlike their Assyrian, Babylonian, and Achaemenid neighbors, have left behind no substantial corpus of their own written records. We have no Median royal annals, no libraries of Median administrative tablets, no monumental rock inscriptions in the Median language. The Medes, as a literate or proto-literate culture, remain largely mute, and we are forced to view them primarily through the eyes of their enemies, the Assyrians, and their cultural heirs and admirers, the Greeks and the Persians. This absence of an authentic, first-person Median voice has led to a long and often contentious scholarly debate about the very nature of the Median state, with some historians, particularly in the mid-20th century, arguing that the Median Empire, as described by Herodotus, was largely a Greek fiction, a necessary narrative device to link the fall of Assyria to the rise of Persia, and that the Medes were never more than a loose, tribal confederation without a centralized state apparatus. The Assyrian evidence, which is the only contemporary written source for the early history of the Medes, provides a detailed but inherently hostile and distorted picture. The Assyrian royal annals and administrative correspondence describe the Medes as a persistent, troublesome enemy, living in numerous small, fortified settlements ruled by independent chieftains, a people who were difficult to conquer and impossible to permanently subdue. The Assyrians routinely refer to the Medes with contemptuous epithets, but they also record the names of dozens of Median rulers, the locations of their fortified cities, and the immense quantities of tribute, particularly horses, that were extracted from them. The Assyrian evidence leaves no doubt that a distinct people called the Medes inhabited the Zagros highlands from at least the 9th century BC and that they possessed a complex, politically stratified society capable of organized resistance. However, the Assyrian sources, by their very nature, do not provide a coherent narrative of Median political unification or a sympathetic account of their culture and institutions. The Medes appear in the Assyrian texts only when they are the targets of a military campaign or the subjects of a tribute demand. They are the enemy, the other, and their internal history remains obscure. The Assyrian evidence, therefore, provides a crucial but incomplete and biased foundation, a series of snapshots of a people in constant conflict with the Mesopotamian superpower. The Babylonian chronicles, which cover the period of the fall of the Assyrian Empire and the rise of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, provide a second, invaluable contemporary source, this time from the perspective of the Medes' ally, Nabopolassar of Babylon. The Babylonian Chronicle, particularly the section known as the Fall of Nineveh Chronicle, is a terse, year-by-year annal of the military and political events of the late 7th century BC, and it provides the essential, indisputable historical framework for the Median-Babylonian alliance and the destruction of the Assyrian Empire. The chronicle records the fall of Assur in 614 BC, the meeting of Cyaxares and Nabopolassar at the ruined city, and the final siege and destruction of Nineveh in 612 BC, with an authority and a chronological precision that cannot be dismissed. This Babylonian source confirms the existence of a powerful Median kingdom under a king named Umikishtar Cyaxares, who was capable of entering into a formal treaty of alliance with Babylon, commanding a large and effective army, and coordinating a complex, multi-year military campaign. The Babylonian evidence, therefore, is the bedrock upon which the historical reality of the Median Empire rests, providing an independent, contemporary, and non-Greek verification of the central events described by Herodotus. Without the Babylonian chronicles, the entire Greek narrative of the Median Empire would remain highly suspect. With them, the core historical truth of a Median kingdom powerful enough to destroy Assyria is placed beyond reasonable doubt. The Greek historical tradition, primarily represented by the histories of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, written in the mid-5th century BC, provides the most detailed and colorful narrative account of the Medes, but it is also the most problematic and the most debated source. Herodotus lived and wrote approximately a century after the fall of the Median Empire, and he was not a native of Iran. He was a Greek from Asia Minor who traveled widely and collected oral traditions from various sources, including, he claims, Persian and Median informants. His account of the Medes is a rich and entertaining tapestry of vivid characters: the wise judge Deioces, the ambitious Phraortes, the brilliant military reformer Cyaxares, the tyrannical and superstitious Astyages, and dramatic events: the concentric walls of Ecbatana, the Scythian interlude, the eclipse of Thales, the Cyrus legend. However, Herodotus's narrative is heavily infused with folkloric motifs, romanticized accounts of court intrigue, and a moralizing purpose, and it is often impossible to separate the historical kernel from the narrative embellishment. The stories of the Deioces, the exposed infant Cyrus, and the banquet of Astyages, for example, are classic folk-tale motifs that appear in many other cultures, and their historical veracity is highly questionable. Nevertheless, Herodotus's account, when critically analyzed and compared with the Assyrian and Babylonian evidence, contains a substantial core of genuine historical information about the Median dynasty, its political consolidation, its military conflicts, and its ultimate downfall. The task of the modern historian is to sift the legendary chaff from the historical grain, a process that has been greatly facilitated by the archaeological discoveries of the past century. The archaeological evidence, as we have explored, provides the crucial third leg of the evidentiary stool, offering tangible, material confirmation of a sophisticated Median culture that existed in the right place and the right time. The excavations at Tepe Nush-i, Godin Tepe, Baba, and other sites have demonstrated conclusively that the Medes were not simply a loose tribal confederation but a society with its own distinctive religious architecture, its own fortified administrative centers, its own unique ceramic tradition, and its own economic networks. The fire temple at Nush-i, in particular, is a monument of immense historical significance, a physical manifestation of a religious tradition that is entirely independent of the Mesopotamian model and that is directly ancestral to the later Persian fire temples. The archaeological record has given the Medes a physical, material presence that the written sources alone could not provide, and it has transformed them from shadowy, semi-mythical figures into a real, complex, and innovative civilization. The ongoing synthesis of the Assyrian, Babylonian, Greek, and archaeological evidence is gradually producing a more nuanced, balanced, and historically grounded picture of the Medes, a picture that acknowledges their profound importance as the founders of the First Iranian Empire and the essential precursors to the Achaemenid World Empire, while also recognizing the significant gaps in our knowledge and the complex, often legendary, nature of the surviving traditions. The shadow of the Medes is slowly being illuminated, and their true place in the grand narrative of world history is, at long last, being recognized. The profound and enduring legacy of the Medes can be observed with striking clarity in the realm of language and toponymy, where their name and the names of their cities and leaders have echoed through the millennia, leaving indelible traces on the linguistic and geographical map of the Middle East. The very name, Media, itself, which was adopted by the Greeks from the Old Persian Mada, and which in turn was derived from the Assyrian Madai, has survived in the name of the modern Iranian province of Hamadan, which is the direct descendant of the ancient city of Ecbatana, the Hagmatana of the Old Persian inscriptions. The name, Hamadan, is a phonetic evolution of Hagmatana, meaning place of assembly, and the modern city, a bustling provincial capital of over 500,000 people, still occupies the same strategic highland plain and the same sacred mound that was the heart of the Median Empire. The toponym, Media, itself persisted through the Hellenistic and Roman periods as a geographical designation for the mountainous region of northwestern Iran, and it was used by classical geographers like Strabo and Ptolemy to describe the broad territory between the Caspian Sea and the Mesopotamian plain. The Arabic geographers of the medieval period knew the region as Al-Jibal, meaning the mountains, a direct translation of the ancient concept of Media as the mountainous heartland, and the name, Jibal, remained in use for centuries. The modern ethnic and linguistic map of the region still bears the imprint of the ancient Median presence, with the Kurdish people, who inhabit large areas of the ancient Median homeland, being the linguistic and, to a significant degree, the genetic descendants of the ancient Medes, a living connection to the deep past. The linguistic legacy of the Medes is more elusive, as the Median language itself has perished, leaving behind no substantial corpus of written texts. However, its existence and its close relationship to Old Persian are attested by a number of Median loanwords that appear in the Old Persian royal inscriptions, as well as by the indirect evidence of the later Iranian languages that developed in the region. The Old Persian inscriptions of the Achaemenid kings, while written in the Persian language, contain a significant number of words and names that are clearly of Median origin, reflecting the deep cultural and political influence of the Medes on the Achaemenid court. For example, the Old Persian word for king, used in the compound title Zaya, which is the second element of the title, King of Kings, is believed by many linguists to be a Median form, distinct from the expected Persian form. The names of the Median kings and nobles that appear in the Greek and Persian sources, Deioces, Phraortes, Cyaxares, Astyages, Harpagus, are clearly Iranian in origin and can be etymologically analyzed to reveal their original meanings. Cyaxares, for example, is the Greek rendering of the name Huvaxtra, which means of good fame, or well-ruling. Astyages is the Greek form of Arsti Viga, meaning spear thrower. These names, and the other fragments of the Median language, are precious linguistic fossils that provide a tantalizing glimpse of a lost tongue and confirm the Iranian identity of the Median people. The memory of the Medes in the broader Iranian cultural consciousness, as we have seen, was primarily preserved through the mythologized tradition of the Cyaxares kings, which was transmitted orally and eventually enshrined in the Shahnameh. In this epic tradition, the historical Medes and Achaemenids are merged into a single, glorious line of Iranian monarchs who ruled the world in the age of the great heroes before the Macedonian conquest. The specific names of the Median kings, Deioces, Phraortes, Cyaxares, do not appear in the Shahnameh. They were forgotten, replaced by the legendary figures of the Cyaxares cycle. However, the deeds and the characteristics of the Median Empire, the unification of the Iranian tribes, the construction of magnificent capitals, the great wars against the demonic, oppressive enemy from the west, the Assyrians, transformed into the legendary Turanians, the mastery of cavalry and archery, and the wise and just administration of the empire, are all vividly present in the epic. The Shahnameh is not a historical chronicle, but it is a profound and authentic expression of the collective cultural memory of the Iranian people, a memory that had preserved, in transmuted and mythologized form, the essential truths about the first great Iranian empire, the Empire of the Medes. The cultural shadow of the Medes, in this sense, was not a faint, disappearing trace but a powerful, generative force that shaped the Iranian national identity for over 1,000 years. The legacy of the Medes in the wider world, beyond the borders of Iran, is perhaps most famously and enduringly encapsulated in the biblical tradition, where the Medes are consistently portrayed as a powerful, divinely ordained instrument of God's judgment against the hated Assyrian and Babylonian empires. The prophetic books of the Old Testament, particularly Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Nahum, are filled with vivid, terrifying prophecies of the coming of the Medes, a fierce and unstoppable people from the mountains who will execute God's vengeance upon the oppressors of Israel. The Book of Nahum, which celebrates the destruction of Nineveh, does not explicitly name the Medes as the destroyers, but the description of the attackers and the context of the late 7th century BC make the identification certain. The Book of Daniel, which was written during the Hellenistic period but set in the Babylonian and Persian courts, features the Medes prominently, with King Darius the Mede appearing as a ruler of the combined Medo-Persian Empire before Cyrus the Persian. While the figure of Darius the Mede is historically problematic and does not correspond to any known Median king, his presence in the biblical narrative is a powerful testament to the enduring prestige and the perceived importance of the Medes in the Jewish memory of the exile. The famous story of the handwriting on the wall in the Book of Daniel, where a mysterious hand writes the words, Mean tekel upharsin, during Belshazzar's feast, predicting the fall of Babylon to the Medes and Persians, is one of the most iconic and culturally resonant images in all of Western literature, permanently enshrining the Medes as the agents of divine retribution. The biblical tradition, which was so influential on the development of Western civilization, thus preserved and disseminated a powerful image of the Medes that has shaped the Western perception of ancient Near Eastern history for over 2,000 years. The ultimate historical significance of the Medes, when viewed from the broadest possible perspective, is that they were the creators of the template for the Iranian world empire, a template that was adopted, refined, and expanded by the Achaemenids, revived by the Parthians, perfected by the Sasanians, and transmitted, through them, to the medieval Islamic world and beyond. The concepts of universal kingship, of a multi-ethnic, tribute-based imperial state governed by a professional bureaucracy and a hereditary priestly caste, of a combined arms military based on heavy cavalry and massed archers, of a monumental royal architecture and a sacred fire-centered religion. All of these essential components of the Iranian imperial tradition were first forged in the crucible of the Median period. The Medes were the great innovators, the pioneers who showed what was possible and who provided the essential model that their Persian successors followed. The story of the Persian Empire, the magnificent Colossus that dominated the ancient world for 2 centuries, cannot be fully understood without a deep appreciation of its Median prelude. The Medes were the ones who cleared the ground, who destroyed the old, oppressive Assyrian order, and who laid the political, military, and cultural foundations for the golden age of Cyrus and Darius. Their shadow, far from being a mark of obscurity, is the very sign of their foundational importance, the dark, rich, and fertile soil from which the brilliant flower of the Persian Empire grew. The Medes are the essential key to unlocking the deep history of ancient Iran. We have journeyed together through the epic, complex, and often mysterious saga of the Medes, a people who emerged from the rugged highlands of the Zagros to challenge the mightiest empire the world had ever seen, and who, in their brief but glorious century of imperial power, fundamentally reshaped the political, military, and cultural landscape of the ancient Near East, creating the foundational template for the great Persian Empire that would follow. We began with the scattered, tribute-paying tribes of the Iranian plateau, a people known to the Assyrians only as a troublesome source of horses and as the targets of relentless punitive campaigns. We witnessed the slow, painstaking process of unification under the legendary lawgiver Deioces, who, whether a historical figure or a narrative archetype, symbolizes the birth of Median political consciousness and the desire for a centralized, just state. We followed the ambitious, tragic campaigns of Phraortes, who extended Median power across the plateau and subjugated the Persians, only to fall in battle against the still formidable Assyrian army. Then we arrived at the transformative genius of Cyaxares, the great warrior king who reorganized the Median army into a professional, combined arms fighting force, who forged the fateful alliance with Babylon, and who led his horsemen down from the mountains to annihilate the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in a cataclysm of fire and blood that echoed across the world and was celebrated by the prophets of Israel. We stood in awe as the Median and Lydian armies, locked in a 5-year stalemate, were halted by the terrifying darkness of the eclipse of Thales on May 28, 585 BC, a celestial omen that forced the warring kings to negotiate a peace and a boundary that would last for generations. And we traced the intricate web of prophecy, paranoia, and court intrigue that surrounded the last Median king, Astyages, and his fateful conflict with his own grandson, Cyrus the Persian. We have seen how the Medes, far from being destroyed, were integrated as near equal partners into the Achaemenid imperial project, their nobles retaining their power, their cavalry forming the elite core of the New World Army, and their magi becoming the official priests of the Persian court. We have traced the long, deep shadow of their legacy across the centuries, in the cataphract cavalry of the Parthians and Sasanians, in the sacred fire temples of the Zoroastrian religion, in the bureaucratic traditions of the Diwan that were adopted by the Abbasid Caliphate, and in the magnificent epic poetry of the Shahnameh that preserved the mythologized memory of the Cyaxares kings. The Medes were not a mere footnote to the Achaemenid glory. They were the essential, indispensable prologue, the architects of the very idea of an Iranian world empire. The story of the Medes is, in its deepest essence, a story about the power of innovation in the face of overwhelming adversity, the capacity of a people to learn from their oppressors, to adapt their tactics, and to forge a new kind of military and political organization capable of challenging and defeating the most fearsome power of the age. The Assyrian Empire, with its massive, professional army, its advanced siege technology, and its policy of state-sponsored terror, had seemed invincible for 3 centuries. The Medes, through a combination of geographical advantage, military reform, and diplomatic skill, were the ones who finally cracked the Assyrian armor and delivered the fatal blow. They were the great destroyers of the old, brutal order of the Bronze Age, and they were the creators of a new, more integrated, more feudal, and more Iranian model of empire that would provide the template for the world-conquering Persians. Their achievement was a turning point in world history, a moment when the center of gravity of Near Eastern power shifted decisively from the Semitic lowlands of Mesopotamia to the Iranian highlands, a shift that would have profound and lasting consequences for the entire region. Today, the physical remains of the Median Empire are sparse and often difficult to find, buried beneath the modern streets of Hamadan, or eroded into formless mounds on the windswept plains of the Zagros. The mud-brick walls of Tepe Nush-i, carefully sealed by their own builders, stand as a silent, hauntingly beautiful monument to a lost civilization, a fire temple that has not seen a flame in over 2,500 years. The Median language is a ghost language, its vocabulary reconstructed from a handful of loanwords and proper names. Yet, despite the silence and the sparseness of the remains, the voice of the Medes still speaks to us, powerfully and unmistakably, through the achievements of the empire they made possible, the Persian Empire, and through the enduring cultural, religious, and political traditions that they set in motion. Every time we look at the magnificent reliefs of Persepolis, with their depictions of Median nobles walking arm in arm with their Persian counterparts, we are seeing the visual testament to their profound and lasting influence. Every time we read the Old Testament prophecies of the fall of Babylon, we are hearing the echo of their terrifying and glorious triumph. The Medes are not forgotten. Their story, once recovered and understood, is an absolutely essential chapter in the grand epic of human civilization, and they deserve to be remembered as the great pioneers, the first lords of the Iranian plateau to forge an empire that would change the world. I hope you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next video.